My experience of Denmark was walking through the airport for mile after weary mile along these empty corridors because I happened to change planes at a time in the wee early morning. So I was walking through an airport that was nigh deserted except for cleaners. There were cleaning ladies trundling around carts all around me, but other than that, I was walking, going, okay. Oh, there's a sign to my gate. Keep walking. Holy crap! No wonder all these people in Scandinavia are in good shape. They walk miles.
The thing is with Denmark that sure enough, a lot of studies show that we're the happiest country on earth and all that. But then you also realize, oh, our main cause of death is heart attack because we love ice cream.
Yes.
Everybody's got a problem.
Oh, I thought it was the skydiving sex. It's ice cream. Okay.
I wish. What part of Denmark did you visit?
The central business district, red lights and all that. No.
That's my backyard.
Ah.
How come I didn't notice you? No, Ed, we are live now, and people are happy to see us, I assume. Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Hi. So, first of all, for those listening and watching this video, I'm gonna apologize if my audio comes through a bit janky. I've sort of fiddled with it. This is the best I can do. Thankfully, we are all here, not to listen to me, but to Ed. Hi, Ed.
Hi. Yes. Hi. I'm Ed. I'm a gamer.
Would that be Mr. Ed?
No, that's a horse. Oh,
yeah, you lack certain equine features. I've
yes,
noticed.
Yeah. Well, I'm sitting on them. No.
Ed, some of the people watching this will be Danish, and they will be wondering why I am fraternizing with the enemy. And we spoke about this before the stream, that our two countries have a minor territorial dispute.
Oh, that one.
Yeah, it's a small island up by the coast of Greenland I think it's called Hans Island or something.
Yeah.
And occasionally the Canadian army comes onto the shore, pulls down the Danish flag, leaves a bottle of whiskey.
Yes. Yeah.
And then we come a couple of days later and, oh, we can't have that. Pull it down, but it's leave a bottle of schnapps.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that particular dispute is really about oil.
Oh yeah,
and mineral rights and stuff. It's not about a frozen island.
Not at all. But it sounds nicer that way.
Yeah.
I like to think that we set a good example for the rest of our fellow countries.
Yeah, and let's face it, that's the right way to handle a dispute. Trading bottles of booze instead of bullets,
I imagine the conference room of the politicians at work would be a lot funnier to watch.
Oh yeah. You see, there was a proposal years and years ago, when we had two rather portly, a prime minister and a leader of the opposition, who were both portly old men, that they should arm wrestle to decide things. And somebody just laughed and said, "Those two arm wrestle?" So somebody else said, "Okay, nude twister, and you grease them first." So, if you want an interesting political arena, we thought about it, and then a lot of people said no. They didn't want to see that.
That is such a wasted opportunity.
Yes,
I would have paid to see that.
I think they should televise it and bet.
You could make a large arena out of it, and you could even serve the audience booze. Everybody wins.
Gaming. All things solved through gaming.
Yes. And speaking of gaming, you have created this tiny little thing called the Forgotten Realms that some of us have heard of, and we would like to hear what that's all about. It's been making its headlines in the news.
Yeah. I am 60 years old, as you can see from my beautiful svelte exterior. when I was 5, I started creating a world that became the Forgotten Realms. And this is about 10 years before there was D&D or any role-playing games. So the Forgotten Realms was a story for me to write fantasy stories in. And I was reading all sorts of fantasy writers because I had a father with a den full of books and old magazines. So although I loved The Lord of the Rings and I liked Conan and I loved Lord Dunsany and Roger Zelazny was just starting his Amber novels and so on, the person I was trying to sort of copy was Fritz Leiber doing the Fafhrd and Grey Mouser short
Yes.
stories because every short story is self-contained. It's its own satisfying fantasy story. But if you happen to get enough issues of Fantastic or whatever magazine they're being published in, you realize, oh, there's a world here, and we're seeing a little bit more of it in each story. So I did that with a Falstaff character. Mert, the moneylender, was my first Realms protagonist, and he was a little bit of Shakespeare's Falstaff, a little bit of Poul Anderson's Nicholas van Ryn from the Pulsotechnic
Yes.
League, and then there was a writer called Guy Gilpatrick who wrote a series of short stories in all the men's magazines of the 1950s about Glencannon, who was this drunken engineer down in the engine room of a tramp freighter as it went all over the world. And he spent all his time drinking Duggan's Dew of Kirkintilloch and throwing the empties overboard. So I put those 3 characters together and came up with Mert the Moneylender, and he wandered from coast port to coast port along what became the Sword Coast.
So that was your way of introducing the various locations of the Forgotten Realms in that episodical format.
Yeah, to me. I mean, I was just writing for me back then, and then for my dad's entertainment. And my dad happened to work at that point, Canadian Arsenals and so on. So he would take them into work with all these guys to read, and they'd all pass them around, and they'd say, "Hey, this is pretty good, Bob. Can we have a sex scene in the next one?" And my father would say, "He's 5." Or he's 6.
Well, never underestimate a child's interests.
Yeah.
Uh,
Anyway, that's how the realm started, as a story world for me, just for me, and the D&D came along
yes.
later.
And to be honest, I think that's how it should be done, because if you write for yourself, then at least you'll be satisfied. And why would you publish something to everyone else if you don't enjoy it yourself?
Yeah, exactly. And readers can tell when you're not having fun.
Yeah.
When you're just pushing it out. But if you're really having fun, readers can tell that too.
Sure. And I think I'm not a writer myself, but I know a lot of people who are aspiring to be, and I personally enjoy to read a lot of books, obviously, and I think we all have our sorts of general standards and inspirations and go-to works of fiction. For example, whenever people ask me, so what book do you think I should read next, because they have finished the last book, obviously you're going to say Lord of the Rings because it's a fantastic story. But then I always have other free go-to sort of like, as you mentioned, Lord Dunsany's The King of Elfland's Daughter. Howard Pyle's Arthurian retellings, especially with illustrations.
Yes.
And Guy Gavriel's case, Fire on the Tapestry. And
beautiful.
Absolutely beautiful. Although I have to say, I read it at way too early an age, because some things that happen in that novel are not meant to be read by those pure of heart.
Yeah, well, for those of you who haven't read the Fionn Tapestry, Guy Kay is a friend. He's one of our best Canadian writers, and the Fionn Tapestry is like a collision between Lord of the Rings, King Arthur, and 3 university students at Stonehenge. You put them all together.
It is the perfect fish out of water story, I think.
Yeah.
and there's some absolutely amazing delves into the themes of redemption and forgiveness, and go read it if you have.
Yes. Hardly recommended by me too.
Across the oceans.
Yes,
Ed, I have a lot of questions for you, and
let's
these
do
have
it.
been gathered from all over the dark archives of the internet. So, I sort of promised myself I wouldn't pick any of the super nitpicky questions. So I'm gonna start with my own, which is a super nitpicky question.
Sure, okay.
And this is just a quick aside because I really wanted this answer. Um, I reread the Grey Box, the first edition of the Forgotten Realms, which of course blew me away when I read it. It still holds up to this day. And I actually wanted to know the editorial decision behind the character of King Azun. And by that I mean I believe he was referred to as the effete or inefficient king of Cormyr at the time in the Grey Box. Or maybe I'm just misremembering it horribly. But I recall him going into the Horde trilogy and, the later source materials that he was this heroic warrior king. And I just wanted to ask you, do you remember the story behind that decision, or am I just remembering it completely wrong?
Okay. What went into the old Grey Box was put there by Jeff Grubb, who became the traffic cop of the realms. By the way, I did a podcast with last night.
Okay.
So he's
how's
still
Jeff
around.
doing? I've never heard of him for a long time.
Oh, he's doing fine. He is part of a studio owned by Amazon, and they just released a new computer game, which is free on Steam. And I wish to heck I could remember the name of it, because I can't play computer games on my setup here. So I just sort of go, oh, that's nice, because I don't get to play it. Anyway, so he's doing just fine. He and Karen Conlon, who was our long-suffering editrix, put together the old Grey Box from about 1/30th of what I sent them. You see, when the TSR purchased the realms, Jeff and I established this is all pre-internet. The only way to send stuff was on floppy disks, FedExed, courier service, and with printouts. So I would wrap these things within an inch of their life, and I'd courier them off weekly. And they were getting tons of stuff, way too much to use. And they put a tiny fraction of it in the old Grey Box. And they made the decision as to what went in. The whole point of Cormyr as a kingdom, Cormyr is our closest realm in the Forgotten Realms to merry oldie England, as seen King Arthur. Okay, but we wanted to have a situation that was like the historic French crown. The king was first among equals. Not, so we had a royal family from the beginning, the Obarskirs, and I'm giving the wrong impression here. The realms was never supposed to mirror real world history, ever. But I had to explain it to the people at TSR in real world terms. Yes. So I had to refer back to things, and I said, okay, we've got a whole bunch of noble families. They all came from Chondath at the same time, and sort of slowly pushed the elves back. The elves had taken what became Cormyr from a dragon, the purple dragon. And then the humans sort of slowly displaced the elves, moving in from the coast. The nobility didn't think the Obarskirs were anything special. They just got the throne first. And surely it would be time to share the throne around or something, or maybe we could just kill them all off and take it, or whatever. And Azun, his story is told in Cormyr, a novel, which Jeff Grubb and I wrote together, and it's a James Michener style doorstop. And I wrote the present day intrigue scenes, and Jeff wrote the past history scenes, and then we handed our chapters back and forth to each other and overwrote each other. So everything's written by both people. But the whole point was we got to see Azun start as and this mirrors Shakespeare. This mirrors Henry V. He's bluff Prince Hal at the beginning, wenching
beautiful
and
man,
pouring. Yes, yeah. But he's this handsome ladies' man who has adventures and drinks and all the stuff. and Vanguard Hast is sort of just, oh, geez, I have to go and rescue him one more time, load his drunken body into this cart, wheel it back to the palace in through a back door, nobody sees him, sober him up, and will you stop doing this? And then Azun has to suddenly become, by stages, we see him be an adventurer, and then he becomes the young, heroic, ride everywhere king, and then he becomes the hero king, and we see his fate, his final fate, in later
Yes.
books. But I mean, that's how he came in, and the whole point was, in order to have this Cormyr not be one big happy kingdom, anything that we're setting up as a D&D world has to have possibilities for adventure. So you have all these scheming nobles who are vying for court positions, and maybe we could have an accident happen to an Oborskir and we'll all move one step closer to the throne. Okay, maybe we can have another accident happen somewhere else. Or maybe we can goad the realm into war with somebody and then push the Obarskirs to the head of commanding all the armies. And wouldn't it be tragic if they all died? So because of that setup, it then there gives you breathing space for adventure.
Absolutely, that makes total sense. And now that you mentioned Cormyr novel, that's actually one of my favorite Realms novels, beautifully written. And I think it's a very interesting way of storytelling, because usually when you retell the story of a kingdom, most of the time it's a top-down perspective. And what I really liked about the Cormyr novel was that it was sort of like a part soap opera and part history lesson, because you were there with the characters and witnessing the events as they unfurled.
Yeah, and we had one of the things I insisted on in my bits of writing were that we step outside the throne room and show what life is like in the kingdom for everybody. So foresters, shopkeepers, farmers, because otherwise, far too much of what we see, particularly on television or in movies, when it looks at history, whether you're talking about I, Claudius, or the Six Wives of Henry VIII or whatever, you get to see throne rooms.
Yes.
You don't get to see the common people, which is that famous joke that the Monty Python did in the Holy Grail, where they're saying, well, he has to be a king. He hasn't got all over him. I mean, that is a lovely moment, because it sort of points you right at, no. What does it matter to the common people, the vast majority? What is it like to live in that realm? These privileged people, we like to look over their shoulders because, hey, there's good clothes, nice food, gold. It's the corridors of power. It's where people can behead each other or stick daggers into each other in an alleyway, and it matters.
Yes.
Whereas if you see two guys drunkenly pushed out of a tavern who start daggering each other in the alleyway, you say, oh, it's Thursday.
Yes, I agree completely. And I one of the most memorable scenes for me was not even one of those big "that's a threat to the crown" thing. I think it was in the present time with a merchant in turret tops talking about, oh yeah, the Obarski is gonna fall in a minute, and then he's sort of called out on it, and he goes, well, that doesn't mean I don't love the country.
Exactly.
That was very indicative of the overall feeling of Cormyr I felt.
Yeah, and I was trying to do that all the way through the novel. One of my problems classically, or writing about the realms, has been I just keep writing and everything's way too long, and they chop it off and throw it in a bucket and use it for a later product, which is harder to do with fiction. Usually when that stuff hits the cutting room floor, it's gone. At least back in those days. Nowadays we have pixels, and you can put it up on a website as an outtake or an unseen chapter or an unseen scene. But in those days it was gone.
I think writing books has become much more liberal because there's so many platforms to explore fiction on.
Yeah, and that's both good and bad. I mean, some people need to feel the editor's whip, and learn how to tell a lean story. But on the other hand, as greedy readers, we get to see a lot of stuff that in the old days would have hit the cutting room floor. I mean, I collect lots of old fantasy and science fiction books, and things like the old Ace Doubles and so on. The novella, or what we would call a novelette, because it's even shorter, was a full-length work in those days. So you had to tell the story at a furious clip, because you didn't have another 200,000 words to say. And seated next to Sir Bolivar the White was Sir Drunk in the Dark. And the first course was this, and then they removed the trenchers, and the second course was this, and then they removed it, and then they had trifle, and then they had ducks with the eggs still in them, and all this stuff. And it's fun.
As wonderful as those scenes
you
are.
can explore all that. Yeah, but it can slow to a snail's pace. And if we all have busy lives, I mean, there are people. I mean, I am a voracious reader. I polish off a long book in half a day, usually, when I'm busy doing other stuff. But I know plenty of people who live around me in this community who have a book with a bookmark in it that's been on their bedside table for years. And it's not that they've neglected it. Every night they get into bed, they open it, they read two pages, and then fall asleep. You know, so if the book is huge, they'll never get through it, or they'll get through it 10 years later, and then you'll say, "Well, did you like it?" I don't remember what happened at the beginning now.
Yeah, well, you know, I have friends who love Lord of the Rings, and I say, "But wow, what did you think about that chapter?" "Oh, I haven't read the book." And you sit there going like,
Yeah. Yes.
Have you heard of this?
Yes, that's a common. I work in public libraries, and that's a common library joke. So what'd you think of it? Oh, I'm waiting for the movie.
And the thing is, I can sort of understand them, because the Jackson movies were not completely faithful, but decent retellings of the story. I mean, I'm sad that we didn't see the Scouring of the Shire, but I understand why it was cut from a film technical standpoint. My major gripe with those movies were mostly the editing of the first one, particularly, Fellowship of the Ring, where they had so many close-ups, you know. Is it secret? Is it safe? And there's so many scenes of that. And okay. Thankfully, it was faded out in the two next movies.
Well, you see, some movies, there's a recent movie called Knives Out, uses a lot of close-ups, and it works. Because Knives Out is like a Clue brought to life. Eccentric old house, you know, full of stuff, huge family cast. One of them may or may not be a murderer, and you're trying to differentiate amongst all these people. So close-ups work. But on the other hand, as my dad used to say, you better have a good excuse for making me look up this character's nose one more time.
It has to be relevant to the plot.
Yes.
Wonderful. I'm gonna take a different question now, so people don't feel left out of this. And
okay,
these questions take a lot of forms. Some are Forgotten Realms, some are writing advice, and some are just general world building. So be prepared.
Fire away. I'm easy.
Wonderful. The first one says, how do you handle lore that can be misinterpreted, or in-universe history that has been rewritten by multiple different sources contradicting each other? So I'm sort of guessing he's meaning unreliable narrators.
How do I handle it? I have it all the time. The Realms has been brought to us by unreliable narrators from the very beginning, because that builds in, for Dungeons & Dragons, DM wiggle room. And of course, you can say, well, the DM can just change anything anyway. But in the very early days of D&D, almost everybody read Dragon Magazine and all the rule books. So players and dungeon masters, and a substantial number of players were what we would today call rules lawyers. They'd memorized everything. So they would not only argue with the dungeon master at the table if something was different from what had been printed, but they also could use their metagaming knowledge. Oh, it's either a beholder or a Gaspor. Those are the only two monsters that look like this. And therefore, one of the things I wanted to give the Dungeon Master justification to move the gaming away from arguments at the table and keep it an immersive role-playing experience, so we're all just storytelling and we're not getting bogged down in fights. Well, on page 36 of the Monster Manual, instead we're storytelling and experiencing it, was to make it clear that there was an unreliable narrator. If you speak as an omniscient, or you write in Dragon Magazine as an omniscient voice, as an author, you have to say things, because you're writing for D&D, like, there are 3 orcs in room 6, and their hit points are blah, blah, blah. But if you use a narrator, like, say, Elminster, he can say, it's rumored that there are some orcs in the old ruined castle, but I don't place much credence in it myself. And then you've built in, the Dungeon Master can do anything. There can be orcs, there can be no orcs, there can be human brigands who've killed a bunch of orcs and have their heads on pikes, and sort of stick them around the corner to draw arrow fire. Here's your orcs. Yeah, they're sort of withered and shriveled, and the tongues are falling off.
But yeah, of course. And I would say, from personal experience, dabbling in some minor writing, I would say that the unreliable narrator for game design is obviously a wonderful tool. But if you're planning on writing a novel or establishing a coherent universe, I would also say that you should use it sparingly, because if everything is subject to the unreliable narrator, then you miss that authoritative voice that gives you some cornerstone lore.
True. And yeah, use it sparingly. Some writers, George Railroad Martin, Game of Thrones, if you read the books as opposed to watch the television series, one of the things George is very good at is telling the same incident over the shoulder of different characters. And they saw what went on completely differently from each other. And while you're reading character X's account, you believe it. You believe what you're being told the truth. And then later on in the book, you get character Y's take on the exact same incident, and you believe it while you're reading it, even though your brain is telling you, oh, okay, this is really unreliable. But George is really good at doing this.
Absolutely.
For your average writer, I would say, yeah, dabble in it sparingly. Do not use it to the hilt, because there is a point at which your reader says, well, why should I care about any of this anyway? I can't trust a single thing the writer is telling me.
And
why am I wasting my time on it?
Exactly. And you mentioned Elminster as your sort of go-to medium for realms information. And I believe especially in the older publications, it was sort of the official statement that he would visit you on Earth and relay the information to you.
Yes.
And that brings me to wonder, whenever he wasn't visiting you, but he was on Earth, did he entertain people as the man they call Ravine, considering it is Canada?
Well, no. Usually when he wasn't visiting me, he was using various magical disguises to eat ice cream. Loves ice cream. Sample all of our various intoxicating beverages, visit fine restaurants everywhere, and just generally see the sights. And to Elminster, he wants to experience things. He's very old by our standards. He's very jaded. He wants to experience things. So if, for instance, he went to see certain ladies dance the can-can, he doesn't just want to watch them. He wants to turn himself into the shape of one of the ladies and join the dance to see what it feels like. He wants to experience it. So he was doing a lot of that when he was on Earth, but not seeing me. So if you anything odd that you may have witnessed in your local neighborhood, particularly about 20 years ago, where somebody behaved out of character, or their curiosity seemed to drive them into doing things that were frankly dangerous, You know,
Oh.
the old joke used to be trying to repair your car while you're driving it at high speed down the highway. Okay, if you saw somebody trying that, it might have been Elminster, just experiencing this strange planet, this other world, and how they did things. I mean, we were playing Dungeons and Dragons. Elminster did want to play paper and paychecks.
Wonderful. And of course, that now that you mentioned he sampled things, that makes me wonder about something we talked about prior to this stream. Did he ever try one of those apparently high-class pizzas of Sweden?
Yes, he
Were
did.
they any good?
Um, uh, he seemed to love them, but you got to remember, it's because he was after the
Hmm.
unusual. And I do have to tell you that Elminster loves Hawaiian pizza, which is a controversy point amongst pizza
Well,
lovers.
this stream is for pineapple lovers only.
There you go. Okay. Um, Elminster is actually guilty of picking all the pineapple and ham off a Hawaiian pizza when it was just been taken out of the oven, and I hadn't yet got the pizza cutter around to it because I was doing 6 pizzas at once for a large gaming group, and Elminster just sort of ate everything off the Hawaiian pizza, so it became a 2-cheese pizza.
Oh, that sounds exotic.
Yes, yes. But yeah, he is also guilty of um, going into my kitchen cupboards, um, magicking shrimp out of a tin, mushrooms out of a tin, oysters and mussels out of tins, and then magicking the existing cheese on the pizza to become molten and just scattering everything in huge heaps, and then standing back and indicating, like, look at this wonderful thing I've done. And I said, oh, okay, is there going to be no vegetables on it? He just gave me this dirty look and chopped a leek in midair, so all the green stuff fell on top of it. And he goes, there you go.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I'm sure we could talk about the consistency of
Yeah, for
magical pizza for
hours.
hours, but I feel it's
Yeah.
fairer if I continue the questions.
Yes, yeah, yeah, good
Yes.
idea.
Here's the dungeon master who asks for dungeon mastering advice, and he says, "Do you have any suggestions to making feuds between noble houses feel more genuine than it just boiling down to my family is better than your family?"
Ah, okay. So, remember we were talking earlier about the territorial dispute between Denmark
Yeah.
and Canada. A perfect thing to uh, hang a feud on is disputed territory, and it doesn't have to be like half the kingdom. It can be 1 or 2 valuable downtown buildings in a city
Or if you're really
that
petty, a
there's
tree.
yeah, but something that there's a dispute
Hmm.
over. And the other thing is, if you set up a kingdom like Cormyr, which has an established etiquette, quite often the noble houses don't want to openly engage each other. They're not doing Montague and Capulet stuff here because people end up dead in the
Hmm.
streets. And even if you end up on the winning side, you could end up exiled. You murdered another noble in front of a temple, and you got blood on the priest's robes. Out of this kingdom for you. Well, it's a much better and gives you a better adventuring gaming setup if they both hire outland adventurers, the player characters, to do their dirty work for them, because then there's plausible deniability. If you get caught, then the noble says, I've never seen these outlanders before in my life. I would never associate with such ruffians. And then it's the player characters that have to have their heads chopped off or be exiled or whatever, because the nobles have just, and if the nobles do it well, they don't even deal with the player characters. They work through a mysterious middleman who meets them at a tavern or an inn, or walks into their bedchambers late at night and says, how'd you like to be really rich?
Hopefully they don't say that more often than not to female adventurers.
Well, it depends. It's a good middleman contact will have spied on and observed his player characters beforehand, and will decide what the most effective approach is. Remember, that middleman wants to keep their hide intact. They want to get what they want with the minimum amount of fuss at the lowest price. So, hey, if I can frame you for something so you're in trouble, or if I know you owe the innkeeper so much for lodgings and you can't pay it, and I undertake to make your bill go away, perhaps you could just do this little thing for me, so the price is less, you see. So yeah, nobody wants to be confronting female player characters in a way that is going to get their back up. Everybody's trying to do this thing as slickly and play the situation and manipulate. In fact, that's one of the delights. If you have a good DM who can act, and the whole campaign is predicated on all the player characters act their characters somewhat above the level of, oh, the penguin on top of your TV is about to explode, funny Monty Python voices, but actually role-playing their characters. A good dungeon master can manipulate the player characters into so much that they discover literally 1 or 2 years after it happened in real time, and they turn and look at the dungeon master and say, you word we can't say on a live stream.
I wonder what that could be.
But I mean, it adds a layer and depth to role-playing campaigns that is so much better than, oh, did you buy that latest adventure? Okay, you're going to run us through it, eh? Okay, what's in the first room? Which is like, it pulls it right into a, let's play a game sitting around a table. And where it should be, let's go visit this imaginary world one more time. And you are Ragnar the fighter, with all that entails. See that lady giving you the dagger glare? That's probably the lady you splashed last week when you were running down the alleyway. And why were you running down the alleyway again? You see, if it's a stepping into another world, it comes to mean so much more than, oh, so and so's going to be late, so you better bring the pizza.
Yeah. I get that, and I think that's a valuable lesson to take away from one of the points you're making, is that if you put genuine thought into the plot, in the sense that if you treat the world as if it was a real place, then it comes across as more believable in a way.
Yeah, and if all the player characters have investments, have day jobs, have relationships with all the NPCs, they generate a lot of the plot, and they get to really be adventurers. Instead of you saying, okay, I bought the new adventure, so we're going to run through it, you hold a council of war in character where all the player characters, they go and decide what they're going to do. So they generate the adventure. So they're in charge of their own destiny in a way, and to them it feels so much more satisfying. We decided to go and attack the king. We decided to undress that noble in his stables and see what he had hidden in there. We did this. And they feel a lot better when consequences fall on their heads, because after all, they set it in motion, not the dungeon master at the end of the table did these nasty things to us.
Sure. And if you're really devious as a DM, you could make them think it was their idea when really it was not. That's the grand game, in my opinion.
Sure. Well, yeah, there's this long-standing D&D thing of, I bought the new module, so no matter where you go when you leave the tavern, you're going to end up in the module. But you want to conceal that. You do not want the players to have that real world. The Bonzo Dog Doodah Band had a hit years ago, and it was called "No Matter Who You Vote For, the Government Always Gets In." and you do not want your players to have the feeling, oh, no matter what we do, we're going to end up exploring the Nine Hells because he bought the Nine Hells module. And he's sitting there with a big grin on his face.
Yeah. Gee, guys, I just bought Descent into Avernus. Oh, I
Yeah.
gotta read up on fiends now.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. Yeah. That's
No.
no fun. No.
The next question sort of ties into the last one. It's sort of an extension of how to create believable stories. And someone asked, what do you consider to be the most essential elements of creating a good story, both in terms of role playing design, but also in a novel?
Oh, okay. Well, to me, and you'll get as many different answers for this as you get
Sure.
writers you ask it of. Um, there are two things I need that are absolutely essential. A plot that makes sense so that the stakes matter, so that I
Hmm.
care. And the flip side of that is characters I care about. Characters I want to spend time with. And sometimes some people carry the whole thing on characters. There was a famous TV series in the United States called Friends,
G-
Jerry Seinfeld and so on, which was a show about nothing at all.
Allegedly.
It was just, yeah, yeah. I mean, it was friends getting together and things
Yeah.
happening to them. That's character
Hmm.
driven. Whereas something like NCIS or any thriller is plot driven. And sometimes they have a hard time getting through a convoluted plot in 1 hour once they've an episode length once they've chopped the commercials out of it. There's not enough time left, so things have to happen at breakneck speed, particularly if there's a mystery involved, because they've got to solve the mystery and there's all that time taken. So you can't neglect either character or plot, but for me, I want to care about the characters, so I care about what happens to
Hmm.
them, and I need the story to make sense and be satisfying on one level. That now, as a reader, I don't necessarily need what I call the conventions. Like if you try and write a genre romance and the female lead and the male lead don't get together at the end, the reader feels cheated.
Yes.
You might even have a hard time getting it published unless you were self-publishing, because the publisher would say, "No, nobody's going to buy it," or they're going to throw the book across the room and then they're going to get on the internet and complain like blazes about it because you didn't have them hook up at the end. It's
Sure.
expected. If you read a mystery book which has a great detective who's so much more brilliant than the plotting police, and you get to the end of the book and say, "Oh, I give up on this. We couldn't solve it." You go, "What?" So there are some expected denouements that you should bring the
Hmm.
story to. I'm a little more broad-minded just because, as a reader, book collector, and work in public libraries, I have read over 60 years so many books that I'm saying, okay, do something different, thrill me,
Sure.
you know. And there's in the there's a Monty Python thing in Life of Brian where, in the middle of him being chased through the city, there's all of a sudden falls into a spaceship,
Yeah.
and and yeah, for a few, and you're going,
Yeah.
nice,
But
but what is so really funny about that is how it ends with him right back being chased again, like,
yeah. And
you you you
so go on.
you stood the story you stood the story on its head, but then you restored it to what the reader or the viewer was hoping for
Sure.
or expecting.
Those thematical opposites can be really, really powerful. You mentioned one of the things that drives good story can of course be a satisfying element of the story. And I remember, I think it was in the Herald, yes, that you wrote as part of the Sundering series. Um, as a standalone novel, it was still good. But what I took away from it was coming off the Sage of Shadowdale trilogy in fourth edition, was that the ending of the Herald, that last chapter, it felt a bit deserved, considering everything that had happened in the broader Elminster story. I,
Yeah.
was that intentional or?
Yeah. When we were writing the Sundering Saga, we actually had two secret summits, which were great fun because they flew all of us out. Well, okay, with the exception of Aaron Evans, who lived right nearby. the wizards' offices, who didn't get the, flown across the continent and put up at, the rest of us all got that treatment. So it was old home week. We were getting together, and we got to sit around the large boardroom, the one known as the Bridge, although they rename them all the time. All the meeting rooms at Wizards of the Coast have cool names, like the Danger Room, um, the lowest of the 9 hells, or whatever and they rename them for fun all the time. But there was this large boardroom, what you and I would think of when we went into a company headquarters as the boardroom, because it had a big enough table, and the center of the table had one of those built-in things where we could hear people half a world away, and they could talk to everybody at the table, and they had cool chairs that wouldn't hurt our backs, and we could spend 12 hours a day hammering out everything that was going to be in the Sundering. But Bob and I were supposed to bookend the Sundering. He does the first book, I do the last book. I'm batting cleanup. I have to tie off as many loose ends as we're going to tie. Bob already knew what was going into his book, which more had to do with rehabilitating his characters and getting them into the new realms after the time jump, and that was going to be in there no matter what the rest of us did, So I was already in the, okay, I am writing this to provide a picture of the whole realms. And if you actually look at any of my later realms books, from about Stormlight on, there was always a shopping list that you didn't see, because I would talk to books department and I would talk to games department back in the TSR days when they were separate entities. I'd say, what do you want in this book? What do you want name checked? What little element? And if you look at Death Masks, my last Realms book for Wizards of the Coast, there's a whole bunch in there with like the giants in their floating castle and so on. You go, why is this in here? There was this huge shopping list of things that I was supposed to set up. That book goes with Waterdeep Dragon Heist, but it also sets up everything. So there's tons of little things that I'm setting up for future products that I'm not going to write, that aren't going to be novels. They're going to be games, because, hey, I pretty much have the last book. There'll be an Erin book that is released after mine, but she's continuing her ongoing series. My book is set in Waterdeep, so it's a book, and I'm actually what we would call fan service. If we were writing Star Wars or Star Trek or something, we're dealing with lots of little things that aren't directly germane to that book. So I've been doing that for a long time, and from my point of view, Elminster steps from the Sage of Shadowdale books into the one book that was a murder mystery in Cormyr, and then into the Herald, or vice versa, depending on how the timing goes. So yeah, you got
promotion.
it. Yeah, thank you. So I mean, from my point of view, he is living his life. He's not appearing in books to him. He's just doing the next thing. And although the Chosen all bop all over the world doing stuff for Mistra all the time, it's still the next little bit in his story. And if you look at Elminster Saga from the beginning, Elminster the Making of a Mage covers all this weird stuff at the beginning, and he walks from that immediately into Elminster Mithranor, and then he goes 500 years into the future at a jump to Temptation of Elminster. That's because that's the Elminster book they said I could write.
Sure.
And I always hoped that sometime in the future I could go back and write 40 different books in all the gaps and give you this big saga. But I knew even then I'm never going to get the chance. I'll be dead of old age before I get the chance to write all those books.
No, it's never going to happen.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I can never die now. I got too many realms questions to answer.
Well, there's Lichdom, Ed. I'm just putting it out there.
Yes, there is. Yeah, I will begin to look less handsome as things rot and fall off. Another Saturday night, and I ain't got no body. Anyway, but no, for me, I'm putting all sorts of things into that book, The Herald, and I'm also thinking I don't get too many more kicks at the can before the novel line goes away. Because I knew about that, and we all knew about that in-house long before the company admitted it.
Yes.
I mean, we could tell all the editors were being let go, and they were editing our books as freelancers and so on. And okay, the book department's going away. Okay. So you try and put in all the things you can so that you feel better about it, and so that the readers will go, well, at least he gave us this hint. At least we got to see her one last time, or whatever it is. So I was cramming the books full of other little things because I knew it's like,
Yeah.
I'm not going to get too many more chances.
No,
like
and
this.
I'm not going to spoil it for those who haven't read Death Masks, but it has a lot of fan favorite appearances from a lot of characters that are beloved by a lot of fans. One of the questions actually ties into the novel line that Wizards cancelled. Someone wanted me to ask you if there are any more Elminster books forthcoming, and obviously they cancelled the line, so no. I want to twist. Oh, no, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, you can have future Realms novels by any of us, but now they have to be outside licenses who come to Wizards of the Coast and make a pitch. That's why Bob has another trilogy. HarperCollins came to Wizards of the Coast and said, hey, do you want to strike a deal? So that's the way to get future Realms novels.
Sure.
For an outside company to come to Wizards and say, hey, we'd like this writer to write books about this character, and here's the financial terms we can give you. Because if there's something that interests Wizards, that is how you handle an IP under the Hasbro umbrella.
Sure.
You license it for hand puppets, lunch buckets, Etch-a-Sketch slates and stuff. And if you come to them with a good idea that fits with the brand, they may go for it.
Sure, and the thing is, I wonder. Obviously, some of you authors of the novel line also want to continue writing. I assume so much from example Aaron Evans' Brimstone Angels trilogy. I would think that would have been a wonderful tie novel to descend into Avernus. And I obviously get the feel from you that you would also like to continue writing wonderful books for the realms.
Sure.
So I want to twist that guy's question into something that may be constructive, and that is, given that the role-playing industry is essentially a service industry, so it's reliant on supply and demand. What can we as consumers do to facilitate more novels forthcoming?
Well, like I said, in this case, you would have to license it. In a large part, things are determined by, and this isn't not just Wizards of the Coast right now. It's TSR in the old days. There are two things that drive products: sales. So if everybody and their maiden aunt buys two copies of something, oh, let's do more of that. They like that. And the other thing is, what lights the fires of the creative people who are there in-house on staff? Oh, this would be really cool. I want to do this. Okay, let's find a way to do this. So those are the two things that cause things. In the old days, actually writing a letter that you mailed to the company as opposed to an online thing actually had some impact. But that was the old days.
The bygone era.
Yeah. Sitting down and writing a coherent letter that said that you weren't some self-important, uneducated boob from somewhere. Hey, more orc books, damn it. That's not going to get what you want. But if you lay out, I would really love this. Me and my friends would buy it because that would have had an impact. Now, it is a service industry. There are really talented people who work there. There are layers of management so that, at some point, some decisions have to be made on high at Hasbro, which is usually a money decision. But the creative people down at the bottom end are great. They're good people. They play D&D. They're into all sorts of stuff. And if you light their fires with an idea, you'll see it somewhere, somehow.
Sure. And it's very obvious that the people in charge of Wizards of the Coast of the moment are Dungeons and Dragons fans. I believe it's Chris Perkins who's story lead or something. Yeah,
Yep.
and
Yep.
you see
Yeah.
that commitment to the world.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Chris is a good friend. We don't talk very much at the moment, COVID and all that stuff. And you can see in everything that Chris does the love for tradition, the old products, the bringing things back. There's also another thing that happens in all large companies that have IPs. Under American law, you have to use a trademark every so often to defend it. If you don't use it for a too long a time, it lapses and somebody else can pick it up and use it, which is why there was another Dragon magazine after, you know, Wizards stopped publishing Dragon or stopped licensing it to Paizo to do Dragon. If you let something lapse, somebody else can pick it up. So there will also be a sort of thing of, oh, it's time to do a new Eberron product, or it's time to do a new Dragonlance product, because otherwise we lose the trademark. But again, if you can license it out to something else, so you have an Xbox game not done by Wizards directly, but is set in Eberron or Dragonlance, that defends the trademark. You know, so
a
there's
new
that.
Baldur's Gate game is coming out this year.
Yes, yeah.
Rejoice!
Yeah, and it looks really cool.
Wonderful.
Now, again, I admire these things more as sort of movie entertainment because I don't have time to play computer games. I don't. You know, there's just no time in my life. There's too much stuff to do.
Sure, you could spend forever playing Skyrim and you would get nothing done in real life.
Yeah. As one of the actors said on the Graham Norton show, you know, when Graham Norton asked him what he thought of gaming, he says it ruins your life, man. Meaning he doesn't have time to do anything else. He's going to be seduced.
To paraphrase The Simpsons, it's true, but you shouldn't have said it.
Yes. Yeah.
Since we spoke about the industry and the TSR days and Wizards of the Coast now, someone asked you that if you had the ability to go back in time, maybe he does, what would Ed Greenwood of 2020 give as advice to Ed Greenwood of 1974?
Oh, get royalties on everything, and you'll be rich beyond the dreams of avarice.
He specifically says not buying Apple stocks.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I meant on the realms.
Yeah.
Insist on a royalty, and then I'd be rich. Instead of a poor game designer. I would also say I would. Okay, on at least 3 occasions back in the old TSR days, I was offered jobs at TSR, and I refused each time because I had a good job in Canada. I had full free medical coverage because I'm a Canadian. And Americans have to pay through the nose for that. And so what TSR was offering me, which they thought was incredibly generous, from their point of view it was, and from my point of view, it was less than I was getting as a poorly paid library clerk.
Yeah.
You know, and if it, and although I'm not about money, because if I'd been about money, I would have been a doctor or a lawyer, hated every minute of it, and be really rich. But I didn't want to uproot my family and my life, leave my friends, travel to another country to live. When I could see working from home, working just fine, because I was already had this thing set up with them where I was FedExing them stuff. And I actually said to one of the people offering me a job, well, can't I just work from home? Save you guys, you wouldn't have to pay medical or dental. You wouldn't have to have a cube for me. Oh no, we need you here under our thumb.
Yeah.
What? Under your thumb? But I mean, from the point of view of my advice would be take every opportunity, do everything, don't say no to any projects, because you're going to get walloped with doing 10 or 11 projects a year anyway. But if you never say no to them, while yes, they will exploit you. They will say, "Oh, good, he'll do anything." But I would have gotten to do even more products. What I really wanted to do was do 2 novels a year, straight through, from the beginning of the Realms being bought to now.
What could have been?
Yeah. Now, I've written or co-written all 400 odd books and about 75 novels. It depends on how you count a novel. Like, is Cormier a novel? Does that count as one for me? Because Jeff wrote half of it. Is it half mine, or is it? Do you count it as a book? But I'm around 75 solo novels and around a dozen collaborations. So I've had my run. I've done more than many writers get to publish in their lives, but I still feel like I should have had more. There were more things. There were moments I actually spent sleeping, breathing, and eating that could have been spent writing and designing.
I know what you mean. Hindsight is always 2020, and we all wish we had taken different paths in life at various different crossings. But don't get hung up on it, otherwise you'll go insane.
No. My father used to tell me hindsight is when you get a good look at what hit you.
It's not untrue. Given that the Forgotten Realms have become a collaborative world space for authors, well, it at least used to be in terms of novels. With all those different authors having contributed to the Realms down the years, is there anything in regards to the general history of the Realms that you would have changed if you were the sole proprietor, so to speak?
Oh yeah, I would never have had the Time of Troubles, the so-called realm-shaking events, that had to be there to reflect changes in the game edition rules. Because every time they did that, it derailed what I wanted to do, which was explore the world. I wanted to carpet bomb the entire planet so that we had, say, a source book about Ulgarth, a source book about the Utter East, a source book about Ankarome, a source book, and instead we got heavy coverage of Waterdeep over and over again.
Wonderful coverage,
yeah, but I love the coverage of Waterdeep, and I'm guilty of contributing to still more of it. But can we do Silvery Moon in the same detail? It's right there. And we get Baldur's Gate over and over again. And I said, yeah, what about Portlast down there and Baragost over there that just remain names by and large, and a few independent adventures and articles done by other people. And Neverwinter gets done, and so on. But I mean, okay, give me every place on the planet. And every time we changed rules editions and therefore had a big realm-shaking event with gods dying and so on, it took away a lot of the awe and mystery of the gods every time. Yes. Every time you do that, they become a bit more familiar, a bit more commonplace, a bit less awesome.
Yeah.
And the other thing is you have areas you never get to. Saucel. Even major things like Thay. Thay's been covered in detail twice.
The Moonshades.
But yeah, the Moonshades. Yeah, but here's the thing. As a dungeon master, I want to start with, okay, what does this place look and feel like? Because I have to describe it to my players sitting around the table. What are they wearing? What do they eat? What does the countryside look like? And then, as a dungeon master, I say, okay, what's going on? What are the feuds? What are the conflicts? What's brewing? What is the world heading towards? Like, is some guy just discovered a new way to rake and harrow his crops? So everybody's taking off on doing that, and there's more food, so there's less hunger at winter, and more stuff is getting stored. Which way is this country, this area, moving in? And I need to know all that stuff. And instead, we get coverage again and again because it's adventure-based. That is, how many troops can they field? And what are they carrying? Are they in back and breast? Do they have shields? How long are their lances? How good are they with their crossbows? Or are they using longbows? And it's like, yeah, can I have how the society works before we get a bunch of rules for how to destroy it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I obviously mentioned the Moonchase, and as you mentioned, there's Fae, and there's a lot of it. I don't think we've had a source book for Comir in since the second edition or something.
Yeah, we've had one
Yeah.
source book and a backdrop article. Oh, by the way, there are two areas that were given to outside third parties for Adventures League play.
Mm.
Baldman Games, which runs the Adventures League play at Gen Con and some other venues, was given the Moonchase. And the people from Baldman Games, along with the Realm's Desire, Eric Menji, did a detailed, updated 5e Moonchase thing, which you can get at DM's Guild. And they gave Alex Kammer the Border Kingdoms, and he and I did, quote, official, and that's also at DM's Guild, Border Kingdom sourcebook. So there are two new, the Moonchase has been now redone for 5e, and the Border Kingdoms, which never got finished in its coverage in 2nd and 3rd edition, has now been covered for 5th edition.
Yes.
So there are two little bright spots that aren't on the Sword
Yes,
Coast.
and I have read the Border Kingdom supplement on DM's Guild, and I think it was Elminster's Guide to Candlekeep. Both wonderful products, especially the maps. The maps are wonderful.
Oh, aren't they gorgeous?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I remember I also invested in the Ballman Games Moonshade product for 5th edition. I think it was forwarded by Dr. Sniles, the original author, I think, for Dark Walk and Moonchase. And
Yep.
one of the questions pertains to someone mentions they have maybe read or heard somewhere, they don't remember it, that your original design for the Moonchase didn't necessarily line up with what Doc wrote.
Oh, no. Okay. From the beginning, when Jeff Grubb contacted me to see if I'd be interested in selling the realms.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that is a decision. The negotiation had to be done by his boss, Mike Dobson. But Jeff initially contacted me, and he became the realm's traffic cop. Okay, and from the beginning, before TSR bought the realms, it was Jeff who'd put forward this white paper inside the company called A Proposal for a Unified Game World for the 2nd edition of D&D. And what he told me is, we need a world that is broad, that we can bolt new things on. And in some cases, we're going to have to take things off. And they made 3 major changes to my world right away. One, they rolled back the Great Glacier and put Vasa and Damara, the Bloodstone lands, there. Secondly, Bob Salvatore had just written his first novel proposal, and I was asked, what's north of the spine of the world? And I said, endless ice and snow. Good, we're rolling it back and putting 10 towns there. And the third thing was, actually the first thing, but I'm getting to it third. Gen Con UK, the United Kingdom version of, TSR UK, the United Kingdom version of that, was going to have their own world setting. Doug Niles had already started to write it, and it was Albion. And
yeah.
My original Moonchase looked and felt very much like Ursula Le Guin's Earthsea.
I'm not too familiar with that.
And Well, in real world terms, Ursula Le Guin had, for her fantasy trilogy, had based it very much on the Hebrides.
Oh yeah, okay.
An archipelago of many small islands, and people, the fishermen, everybody fishes, and then they sail back and forth, and often stormy and perilous seas, to trade with each other and so on. So there are times a year when you don't leave your island, or you don't get far away, because you will never be seen again. Your ship will sink. Well, that was my original Moonchase. And Jeff said to me, I hope you don't mind, because we're doing this anyway. We're going to sink your Moonchase and put Doug's thing in its place, which was the Albion thing, which was far more a continent, and it was far more Celtic Britain or Arthurian Britain. And so they literally did that. They took my Moonchase away and put Doug's in its place.
As I understand it from what you're saying, it's what's more grounded in real world allegories as a sort.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I never wanted the Forgotten Realms to emulate the real world in any way, because for two reasons. One of it leads to bad role playing, because somebody takes what they learned in history class, or even worse, what they saw in a Hollywood movie, a historical movie, and bases an in-game decision on it, and then feels badly about it when the dungeon master says, but no, it doesn't work like that. But because they thought they knew something that wasn't true. And you add to that the rules lawyers who in the middle of a role-playing session will say, but stirrups weren't actually invented until and you go, oh, will you just get out of here? We're having a fun time playing a game.
Ed,
now,
2 sessions ago, sorry for interrupting you. One of my previous sessions, I have a fellow archaeologist in my current group, and as a handout, I gave them a map of Arabelle, and the guy takes it, he looks at it, and goes, "Why is there only one well in Arabelle?" And he's like, "What?" And he points it out on the map. That's not really realistic, is it? And I'm is that the hill you're gonna die on? Is that the deal breaker of
Arabelle is a frigid northern climate city in winter. There is one uncovered public well in Arabelle. All of the others are in cellars of buildings with the heat of the building on top of them to keep them from freezing.
Yeah. I know the guy is watching this, so
There you go. Yeah, I mean, I do think about all this stuff.
Obviously.
And if I didn't think about any detail of the realms in 60 years, somebody would have thought about it for me and quizzed me on it.
Yeah.
So believe me, all this stuff has been worked out, including the geology and where the water tables are and where things seep. But you're right. There are lots of, but because of that, I didn't want real world analogs. The problem is, TSR's senior designers included 2 history teachers who loved real world analogs, which is why we had the Great Wall of China in the realms known as the Dragon Wall, which is why we had the Dalai Lama put into the realms as a character with hit points that you could kill. Boy. And to me, that was right over the line. Let's please not have real life figures put into a game with all the stuff there you need to kill them. When they're a spiritual leader of a religion, maybe you might want to not go there.
Might be considered poor taste.
And the other thing was, if you were trying to license the realms, for instance, not just now with Wizards of the Coast, but there were D&D movie plans from the beginning. Well, if you're trying to describe very quickly to somebody what the realms is, or what a particular thing is, it's very easy to say, well, you know how what Charlton Heston was like in this movie? It's like that. Or it's Three Musketeers only with Burt Lancaster. Or, you take a Hollywood elevator pitch and it's awfully easily understood if it's tied to real world elements. This is the war against Sparta, only updated to medieval times.
Yes.
Oh, I get it. But for that reason, the historical flavor, particularly if you're talking to artists who don't play the game and are not staff artists, and you have to tell them in a hurry, we need this painted by Thursday. We know you've got that engraving that so-and-so did. Well, the Howard Pyle stuff, you could say, just copy the guys with the pikes from that. You see, that's a real world historical echo. Yeah. Even if it isn't accurate, it's an echo creeping in. And that happened at the hands of many other designers because it is a shared world. And I would sit at home going, no. The future trouble you are buying for yourself just to get through this working day faster and easier, it's not worth it. But you see that many things have to be done at top speed. And somebody dies or gets hit by a car and suddenly your designer goes down. But your press time, where you've bought the printing press time on the printing press, you bought the paper and you bought the warehouse space, so the thing has to print and ship. Those don't change. So 3 or 4 designers get dragged out of whatever they're doing and told to rescue a product in 2 or 3 days. They haven't got time to check with Eddie up in Canada other than a frantic phone call. They have to write the thing. So they go to what's in their heads, and what's in their heads is what they've read in books, what they've seen in movies or in television, and what they remember from history class, unfortunately.
Sure, and I, for the most part, agree, because if you put things into a historical context, you sort of lose that mystery of what a fantasy realm is. And I remember I read an interview once with Ken Ralston, who used to be over at West End Games. He was designing role-playing games. He went on to become the lead designer for a computer video game studio called Bethesda, who later made Skyrim. And as the lead designer on one of the prequels to Skyrim, Morrowind, he had this large rule that had to be applied for the entire story. And that was essentially everything must be a metaphor, or it must be based on something else in real life. And essentially what that boiled down to was, unless you can attach your idea to a pre-existing concept in the real world, that idea wasn't valid. And he went on to explain that using real life as a grounding tool, you make the world feel more believable. So you had this continent-spanning empire in the early editions. What's the first thing you usually associate with an empire? Oh, the Romans. So.
Yep. Yeah. And to make that empire work, you have to have good communications and therefore good transport. Roman roads.
Aqueducts.
Yeah, aqueducts, yeah. But what have the Romans ever given us, aside from?
Wonderful scene. Moving on.
Yes.
Another person wants to ask, in a fantasy world littered with all sorts of monsters, so dragons, beholders, trolls, etc., how do you make it feel livable for ordinary people, such as farmers and merchants?
You make it feel real in 3 ways. You have really good, robust trade that you talk about all the time. Caravan merchants, and there's obvious wealth in the human communities. You have strong law and order in areas, and wherever law and order is overburdened or has political sensitivity, we can't send our soldiers in there because that's disputed territory. We'll hire some adventurers. So it immediately gives the player characters something to do. And if you have that, and you have in the setting gossiping that they hear in taverns and inns, the players' characters hear in taverns and inns, about so-and-so defeated such and such. Oh yeah, and then they cut off the wyvern's head and they stuck it over the city gates. It's still there. You can see it if you want. And you build in the fact that there are continual successes. Now, the countervailing thing that we got into in 4th edition was the Points of Light campaign, which is where civilization is weakening and darkening and the forces of evil are rising. And you, as the player character adventurers, are part of the last line of defense that is holding back the dark so that everybody else, the shopkeepers, farmers, and commoners or peasants or serfs, can survive. But that's how you make it feel realistic. You have a busy, robust world, and it's on the upswing. You have explorers going everywhere, establishing new trade routes and getting in boats and going to find out what's on the other side of that sea. You have prospectors finding new mines everywhere. You have the feeling that we had in the real world in the 1960s and 1970s of the world is our oyster. And there was a magazine in the United States of America called Popular Mechanics. And it had a competing magazine called Popular Science. My father, who happened to be a scientist, had bought these magazines monthly for years. And while growing up, I could read and reread them all in his den. Every year, regular as clockwork, they had a cover on one issue of the magazine about how your car in your driveway will fly to work. And you'll only have to go to work 3 or 4 hours a week anyway, because robots will do everything for us. So we can all spend our time on vacation and just take our flying cars to the office whenever the boss wants to yell at us. And they ran these things over and over again. So
They don't write stories like that anymore.
no, but the feeling that goes behind that is the world is our oyster. Hey, not the world, the universe is our oyster. We're going to be mining on the moon. We're going to be mining Mars. We'll get all that green cheese. You know, that all this stuff that we were hearing about. If you put that feeling into your world, then it starts to feel realistic. There will be tons of monsters, particularly if the monsters congregate in two places: underground, so sane people don't go there, only adventurers, and in abandoned ruins like castles and so on. That's where the bandits hang out. That's where the spiders that'll eat you hang out. That's where, oh my goodness, it's a dragon hangs out, because, and sane people don't go there. They spend their time on their farms or shopping in the shops or making stuff. And that's the key. If you have guilds, if you have crafters who are making new things, and the game almost predicates that because it has all these dwarves who are smiths, and it has this race of gnomes, and in Dragonlance they were tinker gnomes. You know, they're making new inventions all the time. You already have that feeling built in of the world is on an upswing, and you put that in, but then you say, but there are still orcs and goblins and bad things, and you also say, and there's always a frontier.
Sure.
And that's where your adventures come in.
Knock yourselves out. And that's sort of the general feeling I think most people get from the realms, and why it's so popular. It's that theoretically, if we assumed it was real, obviously it's not, but if we assume it was real, it would be a livable place. And that's,
Yeah.
I have to be careful with what I'm saying, because I know it's another popular universe for a lot of nerds. I'm a nerd, I'm allowed to say that. Warhammer. Personally,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I can't get that feeling in any sort of way from that world, because it's too nihilistic. People die left and right. The world's gonna end every other minute.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. If everything is dark, the so-called grimdark, you're fighting for survival. That's a different game.
Sure.
Than you love Cormyr, this great shining kingdom, or you love Waterdeep with all of its stink and mysterious puddles that you don't like the look of in the alleyways, but everybody's getting rich and it's bustling, and you love going to this club and you love going to that inn and so on. They are things to defend. So when they're threatened, like Waterdeep Dragon Heist, and is a threat to Waterdeep, not the usual threat, but it's a threat to Waterdeep. So your adventure lies in fighting to protect what you love. And then it becomes, you have something to fight for. And if you can, in game, if you can tie that to the player's real feelings for family and home, and if they happen to come from a broken family and everybody's unhappy, you can reach back to the nostalgia of when they were happy, or their school days and had friends and whatever, but you tie it back to, you're fighting for your friends. You're fighting for your family. You're keeping your mom alive, and the number of times, when you read fantasy epics or even see movies, you will hear a woman scream as the bad monsters bash the door down with axes and go for it. And what they're trying to do is, hey, somebody needs protecting over here. It may be a chauvinistic, where we're portraying woman as the weak thing, but they're doing it because it works.
Sure.
Because, yeah, it tugs at the human heartstrings. This is something worth fighting for.
You have those emotional bridges.
Yeah.
It's really that simple. I agree. Someone wants me to desperately get back to specific realms questions.
Sure, why not?
And someone wants me to ask, in relation to dwarves, Do you have any specific examples of the kind of religious rituals that dwarves conduct in the honoring of Moradin? In particular, how would an adventuring cleric go about his worship?
Right. Okay. Yes, I do. I am actually working on detailed prayers and rituals for a lot of the deities, and most of that stuff is NDA because it's the bits I've done in the past have been handed into TSR and I got paid for them, so they own them. So that's where NDAs come in. But I can tell you a short form. An adventuring cleric or an adventurer of any class who's a dwarf, when you're trying to worship a deity in the field, as it were, out in the wilderness, not in a temple, you don't have a stone block altar. You may be underground. You can reduce the worship of Moradin to having an axe that you set upright or prop upright and use that as the focal point of your prayer. Failing that, you scratch one or draw one on a stone wall, must be stone, and you draw a picture of an axe or scratch a picture of an axe and use that if you don't have a real
Needs
axe.
must.
If you have a Yeah, exactly. If you have a real axe, prop the axe upright with the head uppermost, but vertically upright, and pray to it. There are some particular prayers. You call upon his regard, the God's regard, for you. You say, in effect, I'm paraphrasing here, but you say, I am striking to further your causes, which really boils down to watching over all the dwarven people. Okay, but I'm doing this for the greater glory of Moradin, for the dwarves, and that, in theory, Moradin will hear you, pay personal attention to what you're doing, and may just help you. Or more often, rather than a battlefield help, it's a guidance. You get a dream vision, or in the middle of a fight, an idea suddenly comes into your head. Maybe we should flee to the right, or maybe we should go to the surface, or maybe we should go back to that water course we found 3 caves back. And it's Moradin telling you what the best thing to do is. This might be a good idea, but he's, instead of telling you personally, and I mean, if you're particularly dense, or you're a cleric, and you see, clerics usually pray throughout the day. By your actions and by your prayers, you venerate Moradin, and then when you are asleep, you get dream visions. Moradin may walk, or his manifestation, meaning a symbol holy to Moradin, may appear in your dream, or he may walk in avatar form in your dream up to you and say, what you did today was really stupid. What I'd want you to do tomorrow is this instead. But that is unusual for that direct a thing. Usually it's a dream vision, and it could be something as simple as going back to real world mythology now, the famous thing, the Arthurian thing about the red dragon and the white dragon fighting each other in midair to the death over the lake. And you have to interpret that. Well, that's the sort of thing that most gods do in dream visions. They send a very vivid vision to a cleric or anyone, like a paladin or a champion or just a lay worshiper. But the clerics get it all the time. It's sort of part of their job. And this vision in their dream is so vivid, and it may even awaken them in a cold sweat sort of thing. It's so vivid that they know it's sent by the god. Okay, pay attention to this vision. I don't know what the vision meant, but I know the god sent it, and he wants, or she wants, me to pay attention to this.
Sure, and if I would say, if you want to take it even further, you could say that an interesting development of that could be, how does the cleric interpret it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And part of the fun of being a dungeon master is to leave things open to many possible interpretations and see what, I mean, there may not be a right or one right interpretation. Let's see what you do with this. This is half the fun of role playing.
Sure. and that leads me into my next question. Someone wants me to ask, Do your group have a preferred style of play, like dungeon delves, heavy role playing, anything?
Oh, sure. The Home Realms group, which doesn't meet as often as we used to because we're scattered all over the world now, but from the very beginning, we were ham actors. Yeah, you speak as your character, unless you say, okay, it's become very informal. But when we started, unless you said player to player, pass the potato chips. Player to DM. I've lived here all my life. Have I ever seen this guy before? Unless you were putting player to DM in, anything that came out of your mouth came out of your character's mouth. So no standing 5 feet from the orc discussing how you're going to beat him up without the orc hearing you. Now, that very soon became informal. If somebody started talking about a movie they'd seen, we just understood it was not in character. But by and large, we're portraying our characters, and from the beginning, I am giving them the counsel of war. They sit down and chat with each other about what they're going to try and do in the play session in character, and they decide, and then they tell me what they're doing. And the preferred style of play was intrigue, going around and talking to people, making deals, buying this, selling that, being part of the community, establishing friendships or obligations or contacts, paying debts and so on, so that quite often we'd have a 3 or 4 hour playing session and nobody would draw their weapons. There'd be no combat, but there would be a lot of all that jokey thing with the two brothers in England. Beautiful shop you got here. Be a pity if something happened to it. There a lot of that sort of and
Implications can be
good
powerful.
yeah. So there's lots of saying something to the wrong courtier or the right noble, and then watching their face intently to see what they betray from their face when they're answering you. And of course, the occasional noble has a better poker face than you do, and is playing you when you think you're playing
It's
them.
second nature to them.
Yeah.
Ed, you mentioned that at least it started out that way, that you prefer ham acting. I know that some people are not very comfortable with putting on an accent and doing the big performance, but they still want to roleplay. What would your advice be to them?
Okay, first of all, there's no right or wrong way to role play. It's whatever works for your group. There are an agreed upon set of rules if you're going to play competitively and go to conventions and so on. You have to follow the rule as written and, play in the style that works at the table if you want to get anywhere. But if you're just playing with your friends at home and they want to play a Dungeons and Dragons session like an American football game, and by I specify American football because play stops and then they all go into a huddle and the quarterback tells them, okay, you run around the end, you go deep, I mean, they all use code words and stuff, but I mean, it's the same thing. You stop and decide what you're going to do, and then you play it. And I have actually seen groups who play with their rule books in their hands, and they say to the dungeon master, my character is going to try to cast a lightning bolt, and he's going to use this option, blah, 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 and he's going to try to focus it here, and they're playing it like a game. Yeah. And that's perfectly okay. I happen to like the ham acting, and the ham acting actually is what makes role-playing games different from a board game, where you say, yes, but on turn 31, the Prussian reinforcements arrive. Says so here in the rules. And their zone of control, which many other games have specific rules. Even Realms games like Lord of Waterdeep, which is a Euro builder game, has a different feel for it than full-on role-playing. And I encourage everybody to at least try full-on role-playing once, because it's the one thing this game does that's different from many other board games. But when you think about it, there are many board games, from Monopoly and Clue to less traditional favorites, that involve an element of bluffing around the table. So therefore, there's role playing involved. You are acting. Um, and heck, poker, you have to act if you want. But there is no right or wrong way. But what I recommend people do is, as well as what your group does and you enjoy doing in your group, at least go to a convention and see somebody else playing. You don't have to sit down at the table and play if you're uncomfortable doing so, or don't want to join a new group, or you just don't have time at the convention. But if they'll let you loiter and listen and watch for 5 minutes, do it, just to see how somebody else handles something. Pay attention to different dungeon masters, how they run things. And believe me, dungeon masters of all ages and genders can be very different from each other in their style of running a game, and it can still be a great game. There is no right way. And what the right way is what works for your group at this time and in this place when you get together. If you have fun, that's all that matters. And if you have such memorable fun that 5 years later, the people you played with in the waiting room at Frankfurt Airport because your plane got delayed meet you again somewhere else in the world, and they go, "Hey, when can we get together and play the next bit?" And you go, "My work here is done."
Amazing. It's yeah, as you say, if you're interested in role playing, try expand your horizons, and if you're not comfortable with it, stick with what you enjoy.
Yeah. So yeah, that would be my quickie answer. Do what works for you. Don't worry about
There
it.
you go.
It's supposed to be a fun game.
Sure.
It's not supposed to be the Olympics.
Sure.
It's not supposed to be you're on the edge of the diving board and one judge says he didn't curl his toes over the end of the board. That's -2 points. You're not being judged by anybody except the other people around the table. Did we have a good
Sure.
time? Give them a good time.
Thankfully, I have not yet encountered a session where someone has a gun to my head, but who knows? Maybe someone does that. I hope not. It's and this is an odd question. I'm not sure if he means you or as in a Realms character, but how does it feel being a god trapped in a mortal body?
Oh, it's hell in here. All these aches and pains. No. Okay. For me, I'm no god. I'm just a gamer who wouldn't go away. For gods in the realms, when they are in a human body, they are sharply limited by what the human body can do. If they try and do too much, the human body literally boils and bursts apart at the seams. There's this messy, wet, all over the place, and they have lost their mortal form. So, yeah, a god is sort of like a god in a human body, unless it's a shape they assume all the time and are familiar with, is sort of like you going to a store and seeing some great looking jeans that you know are 3 sizes too small for you, and then trying to cram yourself into them in the fitting room anyway. And you're banging against the walls of the little cubicle of the fitting room, trying to get the darn things on and thinking, I'm going to wreck the zipper if I even try to do this up, but I want to. Okay, the gods are in the similar position. The human vessel cannot contain what they can do, with some exceptions. So it's uncomfortable. They hate it. It's like having shoes that don't fit and that they're causing you pain at every step. So they are getting increasingly exasperated and short-tempered because they're in pain and discomfort all the time, and they can't do the things they thought they could do. And there's also if you want to live amongst the mortals and find out what they're really thinking, so you disguise yourself as a mortal, that might not go too well. First of all, you don't get the respect that you as a god are expecting, and secondly, you might get treated in a way you think, oh my goodness, is this what they do to each other? And these are the people who worship me. So that would be my answer to that. But no, as me, I am no god. Wouldn't it be nice if I was?
Oh yes.
There are all these restaurants I want to go to.
Beware all Swedish pizzerias.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Bob, so Salvatore, when he wrote the Drizzt novels, I think this question particularly pertains to his early works. How much did he consult with you?
Um, from okay, Bob and I have become good friends, and we chat at
Mm,
times. And when Bob was going to use something, he would phone me, or we'd get together at Gen Con. He'd say, "Hey, I'm gonna use the Moon Bridge and Laurel and so on and Silvermoon. Is that okay with you?" Because he wanted to make sure I wasn't doing something that would conflict with it. Okay, but after that initial thing, we leave each other alone to write our own books. And there are times, and a perfect example would be Obold Many Arrows, the Orc King, on what Bob was doing in his novels and what I ended up writing in Silver Marches in third edition with Jason Carl. They conflict with each other because Bob wasn't told what we were doing,
mm-hmm.
and we weren't told what Bob was doing. It was the old turf battle between books department and games department. So yeah, the overall thing is Bob and I get along fine. We chat a lot when we can, but when we're actually writing the books, we do our own thing because Bob's books, like mine, are intensively character
Mm.
driven. He knows his characters and he knows where he wants to go with them, and not just geographically, but he knows where he wants to go in terms of character
Mm.
development, and that's what he's focusing on. So I stand back and don't pry and let him do his own thing because I think we get better books that way because he's being Bob, not being Bob the way somebody else wants to tell Bob to write. And as a greedy reader, I want to read the next Bob Salvatore book. So I want a good, great read.
Sure.
And he does such a good job. I mean, he really blew us away when Homeland came out because he brought what a Drow city is like to life. Okay, he's now the expert on Drow cities. I mean, he took heavily from what was in the Queen of the Demon Web Pits and the three Drow modules leading up to it, which were in the rules, but he brought it to life in fiction. And therefore, he's the expert on it. Therefore, let him do his own thing. I just want to read them.
And it's a joy to visit Mensa Berenson in his books. It is
Hmm.
wonderfully detailed, and it's exactly how you want to see it portrayed.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, Now that while we're on the topic of books, keeping this question rooted in the Knights of Mithranor, because I know it's sort of the same thing. Your books, when you write them, your novels, do they all take inspiration from role playing at the table, characters invented at the table, or are some just out of thin air at the conceptual stage?
I Yeah, okay. In the case of the Knightsmith Drannor, I am taking the root
Mm.
characters of the Home Realms campaign. There is no way I could tell the story of the Home Realms campaign. Now, think about it. This is 50 odd years of
Mm.
play, or 40 odd years of play, excuse me. Characters going to around ninth level, so very intensive play. And I would need probably about 50 novels, and they would be 50 long and shapeless novels. It would be sort of like novelizing a soap opera, like Coronation Street or whatever, because there would be so many subplots going on all the time and no clear direction and very few clear endpoints for books. It would just be this, you run out of page count and say to be continued, and then you'd open the next book and it would keep going. So I couldn't tell stuff from the straight out of the campaign. And the other thing is, when somebody comes up to you at a convention and starts to excitedly tell you about the time and when their player is killed Asmodeus, and your eyes start to glaze over, and if they're perceptive and are watching your face, they will usually come to the conclusion, "Oh, I guess you had to be there." And that's true. You had to be there. It doesn't matter to you if you weren't. You don't have the resonance. You don't know why players were actually leaping up out of their chairs, yelling, or in tears when they finally did something after 3 years of real gameplay, and it mattered intensely to defeat that villain, or to rescue the princess, or to be named Baron of the Bold Tree, or whatever it is. You had to share that experience to feel the stakes. And I didn't have the word count and the number of books to do the build up for that payoff. So I was making it up out of thin air. I was taking the characters I knew and knowing what we'd said of them in print in the published realms, and putting in the bare minimum of what we had to put in there to explain why they were this class, where they'd grown up, who they'd met, who was a celebrity in the realms, and therefore who they had as contacts and so on, or who they could judge. Oh yeah, I met the King of Cormier. So there, that sort of stuff. So I was making it up as I went along, because I had to tell a satisfying novel within this word count right now. I don't have time to go back through 40 years of play and say, what would make a good story? I'll pull this out. And if you try and cherry pick and stitch them together like they did in the first Conan movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, it doesn't work. Those were a couple of classic Howard tales stitched together uneasily. Same thing with the very first Star Trek movie, where Nomad has gone before.
or Flash Gordon from 1980.
Yes, okay, yeah. You stitch together things and they don't quite work, because you're kitchen sinking your kick at the can. There's too many disparate elements and they don't quite work, because your story has lost its focus because you're trying to put too many. It is no longer a feast. It's a stew. And it's a stew that didn't get stirred and cooked enough, so there's big lumps in it, and the lumps don't fit with each other. Like there's a lump of sweet potato over here, and then there's an actual dollop of sweet sugared cream over there, and then there's in the middle is oxtail. Well, that's interesting. That's three interesting tastes, but they don't quite meld together because nobody stirred them and cooked them long enough to make them meld together. And there are books that feel like that. Oh, I have to have a king slain in his throne room. Yes, now I have to have a duel between two wizards, in which both of them turn to dragons and one of them gets blown up. Yeah, and the pieces of that blown up wizard are going to rain down on this castle, and that's going to cause this. And then the queen is going to miscarry, and then, oh my goodness, there's going to be a constitutional crisis, and you're just making this up as you go along.
Yeah.
And there is a writer long dead now in Canada called Hugh Garner, and he had a fictionalized memoir called Ode Ta, because in those days you couldn't use the word damned in print. But Ode Ta stands for one damn thing after another, which is the story of his life. Okay, and there are novels that feel like that. Oh, and then this happened, and guess what? Many role-playing game campaigns, if you tried to put them straight into a novel, that's what they'd look and feel like. And then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and what relationship do those various things have to each other? Well, they happen to the same people. Yeah, but that's not enough to tell a satisfying story. There's not a story going somewhere, and that is the challenge, which is why most of the Knights of Mithrandir stuff you will read, I came up with just for those novels. I had to.
But being grounded in characters that you obviously develop emotional connection to as you read, and this is a wild assumption on the part of this question, but someone asked, beyond Elminster, who is your most favorite Forgotten Realms characters and why? And it goes on to say they can be heroes, villains, creatures, whatever.
These are the sort of questions I hate because I don't have favorite. I mean, I created the cast of thousands. I've created something like 40,000 named characters in the realms, and I care about all of them. Even the the guards who get strangled in 3 seconds when the good guys are breaking into the castle. I care about that. They have wives and kids at home, sort of thing. But okay, my favorites would have to be Mert, my first Realms protagonist, Storm Silverhand, the Symbol, and to a lesser extent, all of the Seven Sisters, Elminster, then characters that I created but didn't portray, Torm and Rathan, played by 2 of my longtime players, are marvelous fiddles for each other. Shrantir, of the Knights, who was a Dungeon Master's character after Kathy Widowson, who played her, moved away because she got a teaching job hundreds of miles away from us, and therefore I had to take her over as the Dungeon Master. And there are lots and lots and lots of other little favorites here, there, and everywhere that I've enjoyed playing over the years. So I don't really have favorites. Those are the ones that I have most affinity for. Queen Filferal, Queen Fee in Cormyr. Vangertahast, even though he's not a nice guy, he's the pompous ass. He's fun.
Fun's right.
And yeah.
And obviously, I would imagine that one of the joys you have up putting these characters in widely different situations, not necessarily nice situations, because I remember one of the few times I have ever feared for the well-being of an author was reading Elminster in Hell. I said there, do you need someone to send you some flowers?
No, it's okay. Actually, Elminster in Hell was a hilarious.
That's one interpretation.
Well, no, I mean, looking back at the process, not at the book. I was having to write that in a heck of a hurry. And I was therefore borrowing scenes that I'd written years before that I didn't think I'd ever have the chance to publish, and putting them in as those memories that Elminster is giving up throughout the book. But yeah, one of the other things was watching how much I could make my editor, Rob King was the editor on that project, how much I could make him squirm by actually doing bad things to my hero, that he wouldn't expect. And that's the other thing. From the very beginning, I have tried to take aim at the cliches of fantasy novels, and usually the editors KO my attempts by editing them out. For instance, in Spellfire, I had a scene which they edited out right away because Chandril, this teenage girl, has more power than any of the people she's adventuring with. And all the people who are hunting and chasing these adventurers are hunting and chasing them to get Chandril, to get her Spellfire. So she's the only girl traveling amongst guys. So I had a scene where she has to go and relieve herself. She doesn't want to drop her pants in front of all these guys, so she goes off into the bushes while they're being followed by the bad guys. So the bad guys immediately see that she's separate from them, and they attack. And all these guys are yelling, "Chandro, help! We need you!" And she's going, "In a minute!" And of course, there's no way they were going to have that in the book. What's the other cliche? That the player characters can go and beat down the doors and attack the orcs in their homes, but nobody ever attacks the player characters in their home when they're asleep at night, and so I put that scene. Oh, you can't have that. Nobody ever attacks anybody while they're having sex. So I wrote one of those scenes. Oh, you definitely can't have that in the book.
I was about to say, but I mean,
yeah, no, they took them all out. But you see, I was always trying to put cliches on their heads. And one of the cliches in Elminster in Hell is, nothing bad can happen to Elminster. He's the hero, right? So I wanted to have chapter after chapter where you go, oh my God, I can't believe what I just read there. Can it get any worse? Oh, yes. And I wanted to keep doing that so people are going, wow. And it doesn't always survive the editing with the impact and pointed razor edge that you want to put into it. But from the beginning, I was trying to set cliches on their heads. One of the other cliches is something that's very hard to portray in a book without the editor taking it out. There are all these fantasy epics where the heroes on their quest, the Fellowship of the Ring, and actually Tolkien was the most honest about us of all of us, because he has Frodo say, I will do this, though I do not know the way. See, the cliche is all of these people journey across this vast world, and they always unerringly find their way to where they're supposed to get to without getting lost.
Sing along the way.
Yeah, and I wrote into my various Realms novels lots of scenes where people got lost. Guess what? The editors took out. Nobody wants to read about that stuff. Sure they do. It's so realistic. We all get lost in real life. We go to a big city, we get turned around. Yeah, but it's not exciting. What if they get attacked in the middle of getting lost? Yeah, but we got to shorten this book somewhere. Let's take that out. It doesn't advance the plot.
Sure, it's very easy, and as we discussed earlier, an editor can be a wonderful thing. It's very easy to derail a plot in that way. And I think Elminster Hill, even though you wrote it, as you say, as a sort of how far can I push this thing I haven't explored, it still works on a narrative level, because sure, the things that happen to him physically are horrible, but at least the thing I took away from it was, yeah, but the real tragedy is all of those memories being lost.
Yeah, exactly.
Keeping in mind that you want to use characters in fascinating new ways, what do you personally think makes an interesting villain?
An interesting villain has good justification in their own mind for doing what they do. Mm-hmm. It isn't just, let's see how evil I can be. Oh, let me eat that baby over there, because that's what an evil person would do. You don't want that. You want somebody who, from their point of view, has every right to do it. The ones that we respond to, okay, there's the gloating over the top, twirl the mustache villain. Count Rugen in Princess Bride. When he's torturing someone and says, oh, but you have to keep your health, because without your health, what do you have? It's
delightfully devilish.
Yeah, and then of course there are the motivations that everybody can understand. When Inigo Montoya says, I want my father back, you son of a bitch. Everybody who's watching the movie gets it. We instinctively feel what he's feeling. And it's quite all right to have villains who are insane, because usually we would judge something they do, like ruthlessly kill people, to be less than sane. But to have a villain who isn't a cackling, gleeful, and the other thing is, you have to be very careful, because humans react to things that appall them by either throwing up and running away, or they laugh because they're embarrassed and they don't know how to handle it. They titter. And in the test screenings of the Empire Strikes Back movie, when every time Vader was displeased with an officer, they'd start going, "Ah!" and die. Well, the problem in the test screening was the third officer to do that, the audience was laughing. It was the reaction to this. And it was supposed to make you realize just how villainous that Vader was. Look what he's doing to his own forces. Every time somebody displeases him, not necessarily screws up, but displeases him, he's willing to kill them off. Another piece of their chain of command. He just shot a hole in it because he's so evil and he's so ruthless and so on. But of course, the audience reacted by laughing, because they couldn't do anything about these people dying. It was horrible. So the human mind tries to deal with it, so it makes it funny. And of course, that's something you have to worry about in your villains. But I particularly like villains who are doing something that they see as justified. They can be crazy, as in, if I manage to kill off all these drow, then flowers will bloom from every mountain. No, they won't. You're just using it as a justification for killing off all these drow. Or they don't have to be raving mad, but they have to be enough of a screw loose that they would do things the rest of us won't do.
Yes.
There are many people who anger us in our life, even if only momentarily, but we don't normally murder them in cold blood the moment they're within reach. We might say, "You GD, blah, 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 blah," and then keep on walking because we now vented our anger. And there are other people who do I never get angry. I just get even. And then they slip the knife in, or the old, that's one, that's two, that's,
It's not a threat, it's a promise.
Yeah, exactly. But I like villains who are doing things that to them, are for logical ends. Because then they are more understandable. And in some cases, this can be a flaw because they're more predictable. So therefore, the people opposing the villain can block them more easily. But the writer usually takes care of that by having this villain either having a doomsday device that will destroy the world, or humongous armies at his back. I am going to kill you, and you will die. You will die in pain. You will die 1,000 deaths, and then I'll have dinner.
We will have sharks swimming in lava, just to be sure.
Yes.
I can't remember which author said this, but I remember this I thought at least, poignant line with good villains are villains to some, obviously, but heroes to others. And I think a Realms author who did an amazing job at portraying villains is Troy Denning in The Return of the Archwizards. I mean,
yes,
obviously the Tenfolds are evil in the strictest sense, but they are also responsible for an entire city of their own countryfolk.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that is the key, because it makes the reader think, and it makes the reader see other sides of a conflict, or, and again, George Martin did it in Game of Thrones. Something seems perfectly justified from the point of view of one character, and that's right. Yes, of course. And then you see it from the point of view of an opposed character to the first one, and that's perfectly logical. Of course. Oh, wait a minute. Because you've got two conflicting worldviews crashing. Okay, which one will win and why? And that to me is far more interesting than, hi, I'm wearing black because I'm a bad guy. Watch me do this bad thing. I will pick up this small child and swing them against the wall so their head splits open and the blood runs everywhere to show you I'm a bad guy, because that's what bad guys do. Boo ha 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 ha. That to me is a lot less. That's a lot less interesting than.
You would have to be.
Well.
You would have to be a very skilled author to make that scene work.
Yeah, but I mean, it's far more interesting to have this. The king and his grand vizier say, we should go away from the guards. We should go away from your bodyguard. And the king says, why? Because he's expecting the Grand Vizier to stick the dagger into him. And the Grand Vizier says, look, go get the royal wizard, have him cast the protection on you, then let's go and talk. And he says, okay, I've done all that. What do you need to tell me in such strict confidence, as he looks over his shoulder at his bodyguards? And the Grand Vizier says, we only have enough food in the castle cellars for half the people to get through the winter. So we have to decide who to kill. And we have to kill them without the others getting upset, so there's no riot and nobody tries to assassinate us before we get to them. Like, after we've killed some people, if they think their turn is next, then they've got nothing to lose. So we have to get them right away. Who can we spare? Who do we have to preserve? You know, who you're going to need if the countryside goes into unrest.
Sure.
And who can we blame for this? What external enemy can we blame this on? I know we'll have to hire some adventurers, some player character adventurers, and dress them as Vikings, and then we can blame it all on a Viking raid, you know, or you know, and that's a far more interesting thing, because, you know, if you as a reader know about half of the plan, but that you don't know how they're going to do it, because that part of the discussion the writer doesn't show you, they walk away muttering out of earshot. And you're going, okay, so we know what they're going to try and do. How are they going to try and do it? And then you watch it unfold. That's way more interesting than watch me twirl my mustache and do something villainous because, ha ha ha, I am evil. My codpiece has landing lights and turn signals because I'm the villain.
I want to see that novel. Ed, in relation to how to prop up a good story, what I'm trying to get that image out of my mind.
Yes, I know you are. That's why I put it there.
So, do you have aspirations of world domination, Ed?
No, way too much trouble.
Oh yeah.
Maybe I could outsource it. Yeah, outsource it. That's what I'll do.
The perfect villain. How much do you prescribe to the idea that in stories you want to leave something unexplored or to the reader's imagination?
I subscribe heavily to that. We had a rule in the early Forgotten Realms. Jeff Grubb, who was Realms traffic cop, his first rule was don't blow up the moon. Meaning, don't write something that changes the setting and negates everything that's already been written about it. My rule was, for every loose end you close off, every unfinished adventure hook, every mystery, every hint that I've written into it, you can see a lot of them in the old gray box. In fact, some of them in the current clack have asterisks telling you, we won't deal with this. This is for you, the DM. We didn't always follow that later on, but but they were there. For everyone you cut off, you answer in a novel or answer in an adventure, I need 3 new ones, so the world still feels alive. I always want you to be building in new mysteries, new adventure hooks, so that the world is never finished. The world is never taken care of. The problems are never all ironed out. And of course, that's very realistic in our real world. We solve, this major problem and uncover the next 3 problems. Wow, progress. Yeah. But I do subscribe to that. Yeah, we should always have
Sure, and of course, as a reader of the Realms novels, obviously I'm gonna wonder, as an example, Rowan Cormaerul at the end of Death of the Dragon. Whatever happened to him? But on the other hand, I understand that leaving something unsaid is powerful narrative device.
Well, actually, that particular one was left hanging because Troy wanted to write future books, and never got the chance. So, out of respect to Troy, whose character it was like, okay, don't say a word about it. Give him complete freedom. So when he writes his next book, we haven't said that Rowan went here and did this or is now living in. You just leave him the blank canvas, and then he never got the chance.
Yeah.
But yes, he becomes a loose end. You're right.
And what you said with Jeff's rule that you can't blow up the moon, I mean, that makes perfect sense, because if you take the world as an entity, the concept of failure, I feel, needs to be conceivable in a way, because if the failure isn't conceivable and the world can't go on with the character's failure, that means that a certain level of dramatic stakes have been pulled away.
Exactly. Yeah. And the other thing is, and this is a big difference that has to be built into Dungeons and Dragons, as opposed to say Tolkien. There is a strong tradition in heroic fantasy of destiny, one ring to rule them all. And there's a prophecy. Are you the one who was prophesied? I mean, David and Leigh Eddings did the whole thing in the Belgariad and the Malorion. There's this prophecy, and they're following the prophecy. The problem with following prophecies, you take away player agency. And they're not heroes. They're just following a script that was preordained long before your character was born. For it is written that a character with one blue eye and one gray eye will arise out of the shadows, or the whosoever draws a sword from the stone shall henceforth be rightful king of all England, blah, 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 blah. And you go, okay, there goes your heroism, because the script is laid out and you're just following it. Boring. And of course, so writers then have to build in but maybe you're not the one. Could you be the one? Maybe you just think you're the one. Maybe it's really that guy over there at the edge of the crowd. And of course, writers have to do all sorts of tricks to put the excitement and uncertainty back in. Well, when you have Dungeons and Dragons, the game that is having adventurers, in theory, pretty much have freedom to do what they want. I don't mean free of consequences. If you try and attack the entire army, you're going to die, because they're all, but I mean, you can still attack the entire army if you're crazy. You tell the dungeon master, this is what my character does. So there.
Goodbye.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, you want to stay away from destiny as much as possible. Or weaken it, or put the gods could be wrong about this. The prophecy says this, but is this even the real Grail? Is this even the real throne? Is this even the real time? Or are they referring to something 2 centuries from now?
You could make a wonderful novel out of someone getting a false Grail and seeing the ramifications of that.
Yes. Oh, yeah. And actually, one of the things that got edited out of Cormyra novel, there were several mentions. Bill Larson was our editor on that, and he did the same thing that Peter Archer, later head of the books department, used to say, is don't let your book become too shrubby. It's becoming too shrubby. It's growing side branches. Let's lop them off and get where we're going. And one of the reasons for doing that is you make the story more pointed, and the other reason is you make it fit in the word count. But one of the things we had to trim out of Cormyra novel, there were 2 separate occasions at different generations with different kings on the throne of Cormyr, in which somebody says, if his body's never found, we'll have 40 pretenders pretending to be Prince so-and-so for the next 400 years, because every GD noble family that wants their hands on the throne will find their own look-alike, groom them, train them, convince them that they're the real prince. We'll never be free of this. And of course, as Bill said, that's a great setup, but it's not the story you're telling here, and you don't have the pages to tell it, so don't raise it. But of course, I wanted it raised because I wanted to leave that thought sitting there so that a dungeon master could pick it up and go, hey.
I know I have taken threads from some of your works and said, hey, this little 2 paragraphs note in that page of, I don't know, Elminster and Mythdraenor, that could be a fascinating story. So what's best left unsaid sometimes can be really wonderful narrative devices.
Yeah. The books department has had this policy that shifted back and forth over the years. And sometimes it's books and games should be separate. Don't show us a spell from the rule books being cast on the page in a novel. But at other times it's, you have to mirror the game exactly. So I actually had, in the first draft of Spellfire, some of the stuff they chopped out, I actually had common spells like Magic Missile, Fireball, and Lightning Bolt being cast in front of you. I described the gestures. I showed you how they use the material components, and I actually quoted the entire incantation on the page. So even if you hate reading my fiction, there's something that you can steal as a dungeon master and just read out at the gaming table when an NPC wizard casts something, and the thief in the party who's read the book, the players read the book, can say, "Oh my God, he's casting a fireball! Hit him quick!"
I'm gonna shamelessly admit that I stole your incantation for fireball from, I think it was Elminster at the Mage Fair or something. That was just a wonderful.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yes, that's fun. When I wish to play my game, let the air burst into flame. Yes.
Back to realms questions. This is also a Dwarven question actually. The city of Earthfast. Oh yeah, okay. He wants to know either post 2nd edition or in the modern day, so 5th edition. How are things going in the city of Earthfast after the Horde campaign? So after the Tzeentch Horde was defeated, are the orcs still assaulting the city, or has it been reprieved? What's going on?
Well, the real answer to that is whatever your dungeon master wants in your campaign. But yes, in the realms, in the quote official realms, the one that we're writing and publishing, Earthfast has been largely rebuilt. It is back in Dwarven hands. It's once again the meeting place for them to trade with the rest of the world. It is not nearly as grand as it used to be. It's not nearly as Gold Dwarf dominated as it used to be. It's far more Star Wars Cantina, elbows out trading, as opposed to, "Hi, we're the dwarves, and we're going to impress the dickens out of you." It's far more, "Hi, we're all just trying to trade here. Like my axe? I got 40,000 more of them in that warehouse back there if you want to make a deal." It's far more like that. Okay, so it's, I mean, there's things like it is far more we have all learned from the violence of the past. Let's get along because we now need each other more than ever. So let's buy and sell this stuff. That's what we're here for, sort of thing. There's far more tolerance. It's like it's not as rich as Waterdeep. It's not a port. It's not eclectic. But there's far more that let's all get along because we're traders. We're here to trade.
A cosmopolitan feel.
Yeah, it does.
Well, I'm sure he will appreciate that answer. Back to world.
I make it all up.
Headline: It has been bluffing.
Yeah. Don't tell. Don't tell. It'll be our secret.
Well, sorry. It's gonna be overshadowed anyway by all the news coming out of the US anyway. So,
yeah. Well, yes. Yeah.
When
Trump, you might say. I know that was cheap. All right, yeah.
I get it.
I'll just put the bucket over my head.
Don't let it hit you on the way down.
Yeah, thank you.
When you create the realms or any world, and I should point out you have created plenty of other worlds like Helmore, Storm Talons, Falcon Farcast, and more. You are, instead of the typical author thing, the man of many words, I suppose you're the man of many worlds. Someone wants to know, when you're building a wall, what are some of the pitfalls of world building, and what kind of details can you put into your world to make it feel more alive?
Okay. Pitfall number 1. World building that goes on forever as a procrastination in itself, rather than telling the story. So that, I can't possibly start writing my novel until I work out the family trees of all the noble families back 18 generations and detail them all out. Nope. If you do that, you will never get your novel written. Why are you detailing all this stuff? It's to get writing your novel. So let's write the novel. Okay, that's pitfall number one. Pitfall number two is trying to just race ahead. I know enough about geology about that. I know enough about the way water flows downhill to do that. Okay, that's good, but if you're going to put the story first and foremost and write the story, there are times when you want to be detailed, and there are times when you don't. It's different when it's the realms and it's a shared world and many people are going to be working in it. You can't be vague in that situation. You do have to put dates in and so on. But if you're the sole proprietor and you're writing a series of fantasy novels, avoid, if you can, dates. Instead, have the old man say, "Oh, that happened long ago, before even my time." That's good enough. Don't get specific. You're painting yourself into a corner with every hard fact and date that you put in there. It's far more realistic to have people to immerse the reader in the moment. How does it feel? Oh, that all happened long, long ago. You know, deal with that and move on. Take your time on detailing little mental images that bring things to life. Like, a little girl is watching all the warriors ride into town. The warriors are all being menacing and they're glaring around at everybody from their saddles with their weapons out and ready. And there's a little girl and she's holding her cat. And the cat goes meow and jumps out of her hands, runs away, and she runs after it. Put in the little details like that make people feel alive and realistic. Show us everyday life, show us natural reactions. That's one thing that makes people the setting feel alive. And the other thing is put in little snatches of gossip. Oh, I heard they got green heads, 2 green heads. And you can do this with a marketplace scene or a busy street. Just snatches of conversation. Don't bog down in this. Don't do it for 4 pages in a row, but you can intersperse it all the time. And Tolkien actually does this when he's setting up that marvelous scene at the end where Aragorn is about to be crowned, and you've got the woman in the crowd talking to her cousins. Oh, this is actually,
the king's touch.
He puts us in, he puts us in the feeling of what it is to be of the people, and just, the gossip and the commentary and so on. Those are good things to do. Okay. And there are other pitfalls of world building where you do something that doesn't work in real life, like water flowing uphill. You can break the rules, but everything you break is going to be pounced on as a mistake unless you put in an explanation. And if you put in explanations for everything, you slow the action. That's why it's easy to write James Bond and have him pick up a telephone, because everybody knows what a telephone is. If he jumps into a car and drives far too fast, like he does in every single James Bond movie, we all know what cars are. We get it. When the tires are squealing and there's some guy in the car or truck behind him, usually a black SUV, firing at him with a submachine gun, we understand the danger and the stakes. We are familiar with these things. If you include too many fantastic elements and you have to stop and explain what each one is, it's not a black car chasing him. It's a winged creature with 4 sets of bat wings, and on its back are 3 googly-eyed things, and they're all holding these glowing glass tubes. Okay, you can then show what a glowing glass tube does when it gets fired, and therefore, the reader gets it. Oh, this will not be good if he gets caught in the ray beam. Okay, but otherwise you have to stop and explain what everything is. You've slowed the action. Whereas a movie maker can just show it to us at high speed, and we're just watching it and go, okay, fine, I get it, they're bad guys. And move on until the thing crashes and we get to see its blood and guts all over the place and all its wings. But I mean, if you are writing fiction, be careful about how much magic, how much weird stuff, how much stuff is away from what we can identify with. Oh, I get it. They're cold. They're all trudging around the castle with their cloaks wrapped around them because it's winter and it's cold, and there's this little fire, and the little fire is filling the room with smoke, but not enough warmth. And the girl who's kneeling in front of the fire has her hands almost in the flames trying to get them warm. I get it. You put in the little human touches, or how people feel. You talk, and that's another good thing for world building. Engage all the senses. What do things smell like? What do things taste like? Tell us occasionally. How do you get that? Live as broad a life as you can. Skinny dip in a lake in the morning. Wake up. Walk through a graveyard in the misty dawn. What does it look like? What does it smell like? Note down, the quality of the light around you, because you can use all this in your books. If all you ever do is sit at a keyboard playing computer games and reading the occasional book, and then you try and tell us about this wonderful, fantastic world, you don't have as much raw material to draw on of your senses as the person who goes hiking, goes down caves, goes to a remote lake somewhere, goes to a desert. So experience things, and things that engage your senses, the smells, the tastes, the feels. What does it feel like to stand? Don't do this in real life, please. I don't want to kill anybody. But if you're standing in the middle of a lightning storm and lightning is crashing down around you, there's this ozone smell in the air. The air feels charged and alive. You can describe that a lot better if you've experienced it. Like I said, don't go out and do it in real life. But I mean, the more things you see in real life, the more things you experience, the richer your writing can be. And the other thing is, your reader doesn't care. And by that I mean, please don't stop and info dump. Look, I made up 42 different types of plants, and here they all are, and here's what they do. And this one, I've got the recipes over here. This one you can actually eat instead of just rubbing it on you to do away with the itch. So this one you can eat, and here are the recipes. Do them, but don't put them in the book unless they're directly germane to the plot. Don't put them in the book. We don't care. We don't care how much of your life you wasted sitting down imagining these things and making them up, because we've all done it. We've all procrastinated when we should have been doing something else, but we did something we wanted to instead. We get that you like doing this stuff. We don't care. We do want to know, we do care that you've worked it all out, but don't stop the narrative to tell us how clever you are every time you want to be clever. We assume you're clever. You're clever, you're beautiful, you managed to finish a book. You're already good folks in our books. Tell us a good story. We don't care how much research you've done. I really don't care. I grew up surrounded by profs and good writers and experts in their fields. I tell you, no matter how much expertise you have, I can find somebody, okay, usually these days the person I remembered from my childhood is under a gravestone somewhere, but I can find their grave, and they knew more than you. And see, I'm not impressed. Tell me a story. That's what I need. The story comes first.
Good points. And obviously, Ed, you're in the literary community in more than one way, being an author and a reader, and so on and so forth. And I think you would agree that, in a sense, you also have to be aware of the kind of story you're writing and write accordingly, because inevitably, and I know this because I have met those people, there's always going to be that literary group of snobs, of intellectual snobs, who are going to scoff at mere genre fiction and hold up this literary fiction as something profound, and I would say that being comfortable with what you're writing is a pretty essential point.
Oh, I agree. Yeah. One of the things that makes humans human is we pigeonhole. We put things in categories. Like this is swords and sorcery. This is high fantasy. This is science fiction. This is space opera. And we tend to disagree on where the lines are. The other thing we do is, as humans, we always establish a pecking order. And part of establishing a pecking order is there will always be snobs who look down on what you write. So if you write it for its own sake and you love doing it, then you can just let their snobbery roll off you and go, that's nice. Different strokes for different folks,
Exactly.
or, oh, yes, it's all garbage, is it? Oh, well, I happen to write fantasy, like the Bible. That's sold a lot of copies, and that will usually engender a sort of angry response you don't want. Or you can say, I write fantasy. It's very popular because it means a lot to a lot of people. And then they go, fantasy, that garbage? And then you just go, Lord of the Rings, J.K. Rowling, Terry Pratchett. Put those three together with the Bible, the fourth, and you got all the bestsellers of the past 3 centuries. Beats everybody else hollow. Come again?
and selling the Bible, there's not gonna be any satanic panic either. But it's actually it's actually funny with the Bible, because if you read it as a story, you hit that point where it goes, who begat, who begat, who begat, and the story grinds to a halt.
Yes, the begat.
Oh, yes.
So yeah, and of course, from their point of view, that was a verbal record of lineages for those traveling tribes. That's how they kept track of who was related to who. But you're right, as literature, wow, it just grinds to a halt.
Curb your expectations is my advice. And I am, of course, mindful of how long we've been speaking, and I don't want to keep you forever. But I would like to round out the last couple of questions, and there's a couple of them that can be kind of stuck together. So, quick fire.
Go ahead. Fire away.
Someone asked, when you first created the realms, did you ever imagine it would affect, entertain, and fascinate so many people across the globe? And how does it feel for your childhood fantasy to become so beloved on such a large and popular scale?
Yeah, I didn't think it would ever. I'd never thought I was doing it to entertain me. And even after it started to explode, in popularity, I mean, I was still somewhat disbelieving. And this can't be real, sort of thing. And yeah, I've gotten over that now, because hey, it's been like, 55 years of the realms and 40 years of it being a published setting and going. So I've accepted it now, and it feels great, because one thing the realms has given me is friends all over the world, literally all over the world. I've got to travel the world and go to places I would never have gone to, and not just the flying visits. I once had 5 weeks in a row in Australia, sort of thing, because of gaming, because of the realms. I get to meet people everywhere on this planet, and I get to play games with them, and I have the same interests or shared interests. We can sit down and chat. We can sit down in a bar, and with over glasses, and discuss something that is imaginary, that I just made up as a 5 or 6-year-old kid, and now people are writing scholarly treatises about it. People are getting doctorates examining this or that. And the other thing is, I mean, the most flattering thing. I'm no longer getting asked to father children, but I sometimes get asked to marry people. Not personally marry, but officiate at the weddings. But I also get lots and lots of people who proudly tell me that they've named their child after a Realms character. So there are lots and lots of storms and symbols and illustrials and laurels. And there's even a couple Elminsters, poor kid, walking around the real world, just in the same way that there were kids who got called Gandalf or Aragorn or Frodo after, and you think, really? Oh dear.
Well, go back to the.
But on the other hand, yeah. No. I was just going to say, at least you won't be mistaken for all the other Joes and Dans and Bobs.
Sure.
You know,
I was going to say that if you go back to the Viking Age, Gandalf was a pretty common name, so it could just be a
yeah,
react
exactly.
to. This is going to be a really mean question, but I have to ask it. What would your reaction be if Waterdeep was suddenly and very utterly destroyed in its entirety?
Well, we'd have to start rebuilding again. No, no, actually, that would be a fascinating. I would be cheesed off because I haven't finished doing my various exploratory building by building guides to all of Waterdeep yet, which I have to get finished and get published. Someone's destroyed it again. But I mean, but no, as a as a dungeon master and as a world builder, it would be fascinating. Okay, what does the destruction of Waterdeep mean? I mean, all of the Sword Coast North uses it as a supply center. This must mean that Neverwinter and Luskan and Baldur's Gate become more important as ports. Trade routes have to shift. What does it do to Silvery Moon? What is it? Um, and what are the implications? Were there any refugees when it was destroyed? Are there people fleeing it, or did they all die with it? And was there a tsunami? Um, if it was sufficient destruction, the water would pour down into Undermountain and flood
Poor
it,
Alastair.
which means it's flooding. It's flooding, yeah, but it's flooding the Underdark, that whole area, and the water is continuing to spread under the earth. Will this cause subsidences everywhere? Will this drown out half the drow or the dwarves in this area? That you just think about and of course, as a world builder and a designer, you're going, oh, I'd like to tell that story. Oh, that would be interesting. What would they get together? Would the Arcane Brotherhood actually make common cause with, say, anybody who survived from the Watchful Order of Magus in Waterdeep and other wizards like the Chosen and Halaster? Would they get together and try and put a magical barrier in, like a missile, to stop the water? Would there be unusual cooperations? The sort of thing that in the famous story Masada,
Mm.
and the movie version where the Jew tells the Roman soldier, "Oh, we fight like cats and dogs, but we'll go back to it when you're gone, Roman.
Yeah.
While you're here, we will all unite against you. The enemy of my
Yeah.
enemy is my friend." So will this cause this to happen in the realms? It's all the interesting implications. So there are many realm-shaking events that TSR has done to me over the years, and you immediately pick yourself up and go, okay, what are the implications? This is a cool storytelling trigger. Let's have a look at this. And so that's my reaction now, because I've been trained now. It's that old joke about the cricket ball that the Monty Python crew made. Hit you smack clump between the eyes.
Oh, yeah.
And at the third time around, he says, of course, I was getting used to it by then. Well, I've gotten used to it now, so I'm used to picking myself up and saying, okay, what stories can we spin out of this?
It's a very open-minded and creative mindset to have in that regard. The two final questions, and then I'll let you go forth into the world again.
Oh, okay. It's all right. I like this.
So
This
do
is
I.
fun.
I'm having a great time, Ed.
Well, you can go as long as you want. Well, until my wife screams at me.
No, well, there's also a time constraint because we're at different time zones. So,
Ah,
but if
gotcha.
it's ever possible in the future, I would love to do a second version.
Okay. Well, I will have less time in the immediate future because my employer will call me back to work after this
Yeah,
COVID thing. So, but yeah, let's do
when the,
another one
when the
when we
stars
can.
align.
When the stars
The
align.
two final questions.
Cthulhu Fataga.
The
Yeah. Okay,
two
yeah, two
final
final
questions.
questions. Sorry.
If this doesn't fall under the purview of NDA territory, not necessarily in 5th edition, how does Elminster view the mage rulers of Halruaa, such as Salaform Kirkson, given his early history with the mage lords of Afalantar?
Okay, the mage lords of Athalantar used their powers to really be tyrants. They really lorded it over the
Mm.
people. Halruaa is different. It's almost like everybody has a little magic. Okay, before the spell plague and all the effects, and Halruaa was more like, okay, this is what happens when you use magic um, to have a toaster. When you use magic to open that door to get a cross breeze without walking across the room and using the handle. And you also open the window to get a cross breeze and put a screen across without actually going there. And from Elminster's point of view, it's magic used to the nth degree so that the people using it lose all backbone. It's sort of like if you can buy takeout food or delivery food every night, if you can get your pizza every night, so you never learn to cook at all. So literally, you go into a supermarket and you don't know what all these oval colored things are for. You've heard of herbs and spices, but you wouldn't know what they were if you fell over them, literally. And you can't conceive of taking a cow and turning it into something on a plate that you might eat. I don't mean that you have an ethical problem with that. You literally don't know how it gets from there to that. Yeah, it's the old joke that we have in North America of people who think that cows grow on styrofoam trays with plastic stretched over them and a price tag on them at the supermarket, and he says no, it's actually was that critter over there. Ooh, I don't want to eat them now, you know. But I mean, Halruaa is magic taken to that degree, and as a result, um, people live so differently than in the rest of the realms where you actually have to farm backbreaking labor, because if you don't raise enough crops from your farm, you die of starvation in the winter. You need to, so crop failure is a major thing. And the thing that took that off the table was the increased trade that we're seeing all over the realms, where, okay, maybe we won't all starve. As long as we give up our firstborn and all of our jewels and all of our gold, maybe we'll get enough food from those ships over there that came from halfway across the realms that we won't starve in the winter. But I mean, it all ties in together. And
Yeah,
yeah, that's
makes sense.
I'm trying not to go on forever for the next 10
No, it's
minutes.
it's fine.
But I mean, yeah.
And I actually think that's an interesting answer, because it's sort of an interesting dichotomy between Elminster's job as a chosen of Mistra and spreading magic and so on, but on the other hand, you have that distinction of don't rely too much on magic.
Yeah, that's it exactly. Yeah. And actually, that's something I only got a brief chance to tell in the published realms. How much the chosen run around the realms and put counterfeit to look old scrolls in tombs for people to find, and little gewgaws and magic items for adventurers to find. Because otherwise, why is there anything left in any of these dungeons? They should have been cleared out years ago. Well, the chosen got there 5 minutes before you did and put something in that tomb and then left out the back door when you're coming in the front door. That's part of their job.
Well, there you go, prospecting dungeon masters, new inspiration. Uh, it's the final question is as follows: what is next for you, and if people want to know more about you and follow your works, where can they do so?
The best way to follow me is on Twitter. I'm at the Edverse, and I tweet all the time. And I will announce if I'm publishing something or co-publishing something. Most recently, it's been all sorts of things on the DMs Guild, like Elminster's Candlekeep Companion that I worked on, Border Kingdoms that I worked on with Alex, the Amroon's Almanac series of the grasslands of the realms, deserts of the realms, coasts of the realms. We do them all, which are actually really useful for dungeon masters. You don't have to use the realms, who are just we're traveling overland we reach this Arctic terrain, or we reach these mountains, or we reach a swamp, or we reach a coast. Here's a bunch of monsters. Here's a bunch of plants. Here's a that you can use in that setting to make that come alive, because you got to camp somewhere. Anyway, so but Twitter is the place to actually see what I'm doing the most, and I am constantly busy being a stretch goal for various people's Kickstarters. The project that I've been working on, unfortunately, it's been 5 or 6 months now because I had heart surgery, so it sort of slowed me down. Yeah, it happens. I still have a heart.
I hope you're improving your condition.
Yeah, it's fine. But there's a game out there that used to be published by Cubicle 7, and it's back in the hands of the guy who created it, Ken Spencer, and it's called Rocket Age. And Rocket Age is a pulp science fiction game, with a sort where everybody fires ray guns and they wear glass globes. Yeah,
amazing.
Yeah, okay, and it's in the solar system.
Our solar system.
Okay. Yeah, and the Fourth Reich is actually hiding out on one of the planets, and Nikola Tesla created a bunch of rockets, and they're going everywhere. It's that sort of stuff, and there's it's sort of the 1930s as they never were. Okay, and it's a really cool game setting. I think we could have a lot of fun with it, and they are republishing it as for 5th edition. And one of the Kickstarter stretch goals was that I'd write an adventure called Bold Brigands of the Belt being the asteroid belt. And because of this heart thing, I was supposed to do that in a big hurry, and I've been bogged down on it. So that's the big next thing to come out.
Awesome. You mentioned you were at Twitter, and I remember when I did some research on what you were currently up to and so on. I found a site on Google, of all places. One of the first things to come up was Office Ed Greenwood, and the headliner was "How to Handle an Office Romance." And I sat thinking, that's probably not the right one.
No. That used to be a domain that I owned when I was running a publishing company called TEG, which has gone under. And I relinquished the domain name because one of the things you have to do when you're winding a company up is you can't be holding on to all these assets that belong to the company. So you let things like domain names go. And the domain name is still there, but the content I have had nothing to do with. It's there now. The Office Romance. That's not me. I've only seen it once because somebody told me the same thing you did, and I went and looked and said, "Oh, well, that's going to be a surprise for somebody." Yes. But it's nothing to do with me. Yeah. I'm at any one time I have about 14 projects on the go because I have a to-do list that would take another 50 years, and I'm 60 years old right now, so I'm probably not going to have all those 50 years. So I'm going to try and get in another good 10 years of getting back to writing some novels, all sorts of novels, and putting them out there. And these days we can self-publish, so I might actually save some time by mixing what I do for big name publishers, which slows you down because they have an editor, and then they take 2 or 3 years to put you in the publishing lineup, the schedule, and publishing on my own, where I can just finish it, whip it out, so I can give people series again. We can do the things we couldn't do in the Realms because the Realms has to match D&D. There are times when I want to write fantasy stories that don't match the D&D game.
Makes sense. Ed, thank you so much for your time. It's been an astute pleasure. And
my pleasure.
I am sure that a lot of people are appreciative of you taking your time to answer their questions.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for having me, and let's do it again.
Anytime. Ed, see you around.